With so many fallen rulers last time, that power is in turn taken up by a new batch of leaders, many of whom have more power than any prior ruler in that respective country's history. That is one of the most important patterns of history that I want us to lock onto here. I want us to focus on that concept of each time a new leader enters the picture, they have the opportunity to do even more than the one prior. Not always true, of course. Nations have setbacks and falls and complete collapses, but a lot of these nations that we're dealing with are on the rise. And they're not just on the rise in terms of power, they're on the rise in terms of development. Going from tribal to monarchy, that's something I've talked about a few times. These are the northern states, not the Greek city-states. They're also continuing to grow and expand, but in different ways. They're sending out colonists. It's a hard thing for us to grasp in the modern world. There's still lots of land that's just out there. Totally good land waiting to be taken, and homes can be built on them, and just new cities popping up. That's kind of a wild thing to consider, something that really does not happen so much anymore, if at all. I can't think of it happening. I mean, new cities? I mean, it just doesn't really work that way anymore. Some of these cultures and countries are coming into their own because of a multitude of human factors are converging near the same time. Food supplies, more trade throughout the Mediterranean, civilizations have more access to a larger variety of resources. Technologies have improved a little bit. Populations have grown to the point where they reach new levels of productivity. Cultural values that lead to growth and success are being reinvested in. But sometimes countries come into their own because the boot is taken off their throat. They've been living under the yoke of another country, and if that yoke or boot is taken away, well, all of a sudden they find themselves with independence and a new lease on life, and well, what are they going to do with that? Well, the first thing they're going to do is make sure they don't fall back into that prior state, to make sure whoever put that boot on their throat takes it off and keeps it off. You can't evolve or expand as a culture very well when you're living in constant fear of servitude or conquest, things like that. How are you going to sit back and read a book? Spend time with your family when you're worried an army is coming over the horizon any minute? And I mean that quite literally, given how close these places live to each other. Again, I have to just constantly restate how close together these places are to each other. I mean, it's 2 days walk from Sparta to Mantinea, for example. And that's a playground we're going to be dealing with quite a bit today. So all this also relates to the developing situations in Macedonia and northern Greece, Thessaly, where a pair of Alexanders have replaced Amyntas III and Jason of Pherae, whose deaths caused these prior aforementioned huge openings. The Macedonian Alexander is young and faces off against a guy called Pausanias the Pretender and a guy called Ptolemy of Eloros, who is his brother-in-law. Meanwhile, Alexander of Pherae is cruel, possibly deranged. He worships a spear, but he's not stupid. Messenia, Sparta's neighbor, is perhaps the biggest example here. They're in a state of perpetual enslavement. They've been enslaved by Sparta for hundreds of years, and Epaminondas has his sights set on freeing them in this episode. And as usual, he has clever ideas about how to do it, and he has justice on his side because, well, he's trying to free enslaved Greeks. That's usually the side of justice, right? But while Sparta had finally been beaten, it was with an inferior leader at the helm, and they'd fight all the harder when it comes to their home territory. So as Thebes seeks to establish its new supremacy, to flex their new might, both Macedonia and Thessaly are close by, fighting one another. Pelopidas is going to head north to add stability. The Persian Great Satraps Revolt escalates as the intrigue within the royal family weakens its ability to respond, especially to events in Greece. Now, Artaxerxes is aging, and everyone's wondering, well, what happens if he dies? What happens if a new king takes over? What kind of policy will that king have towards Greece or lack thereof? It could be something entirely different. We never know. So that's a big what if as well. So we have a lessening or cessation of Persian influence perhaps on the horizon, but maybe not. Artaxerxes could just keep on going. Despite their setbacks as well, Persia possesses enormous resources. But today we're going to focus mostly on a tale of 3 cities. A tale of three free cities, that is. In fact, a term that you're all familiar with, free cities. But their question is whether or not they can actually maintain their freedom. All that and more on this episode of History of Westeros podcast. Hello and welcome back to the Hugo-nominated History of Westeros podcast. We do live streams most Sundays at 3 Eastern when we're in non-TV season mode, which is most of the time. But when there is a TV season in progress, we live stream Mondays at 6 Eastern. Every video eventually shows up on Spotify as an edited version, so it's a little cleaner than the YouTube live stream. Sometimes a little more than a little, but our live streams are pretty smooth. You can also listen to us on any podcast platform. Anywhere you find podcasts, you can most certainly find us. But if you listen on Patreon, you can get it ad-free. If you have questions for us, you can hit us up live or hit us up on one of our socials. WesterosHistory@gmail.com is our email address. You can certainly ask us questions there. At the end of this one, I will refer you to some other episodes that can keep you invested and or immersed in our content. Let's start with the trivia question. There's different names for generals, military leaders, top military leaders in Greece, perhaps is a better term, because general is it's a general term, haha. But partly because these generals in different city-states have different responsibilities and different powers and all that. Athenian and Arcadian generals, for example, are called strategos, kind of like the game, Stratego. What are Theban generals called? Answer at the end. Also, I'm going to say the word several times throughout, so if you didn't already know, you could pick it up that way. Here's the different sections we have for you all today. We have Messenia, Cryptea, Macedon. Then we enter the year 369, where we have the Peloponnese, the Arcadian League, Megalopolis, then two Laconia, Messene. Athens joins the fray, Pelopidas and the two Alexanders. Back to Laconia, Epaminondas versus Cabrius. That's a big one. Then the year 368, where we start with Delphic Embassy. Of course, we'll start with some Olympic victors, too. We always and a special account of them this time. Something very, I don't know, it gets me in the feels a little bit, honestly, even though it's over 2,000 years old. Then we get to check in on what Persia's doing. And then our last section of the day before the outro is our return of the Alexanders. Yes, indeed. Now, as we get deeper and deeper into this series, there's more and more names and terms and countries. I'm trying to help you all keep up with it. I fast forward your knowledge of some of these things by relating them to a Song of Ice and Fire concept, and I know that helps, but I've decided that it would be even more helpful if I put up a primer. So we're going to put a primer up on our website, historyofwesteros.com. It's not there yet, so I can't be more specific, but I'm going to write a list of different terms and people and countries and concepts that are related to this series, which just keeps getting longer and longer, and that'll help y'all keep track of certain things, and it's just also just fun and be useful to refer to at different times. We began this series in the year 404, and now we're in about 370, 369. Artaxerxes and Agesilaus are still kings. It's kind of wild. And Epaminondas and Pelopidas continue to ascend in Thebes as that city-state itself ascends to heights it has never been to. Now, the thing about state power, no matter what type of state it is, whether it's a kingdom or some kind of democracy or something in between, when that leader dies, even if their own son or daughter or whomever doesn't inherit, someone's taken the reins. That power is more likely to be taken than destroyed. Because if you believe you can take power, you generally don't destroy it. That's human nature. People always rather use power than destroy it, unless they can't. If they can't use it, then they do want to destroy it because it can be used against them. Especially when we're talking about statehood and nations and things like that. And as states grow larger, so does their needs, right? And the more people you have, the more you got to feed them. And of course, greed kind of comes with that. The more you need, the more you greed. And the more you bleed, right? Those are things that happen, right? Athens doesn't have enough farmland to support itself. A lot of modern cities are like that. They need to import food because, well, where's the farmland inside a big city like that? Well, there's no room for that. You got to do it outside. But when the city gets to be 500,000 people or more, which Athens was at this point in this long ago, you got to look elsewhere for food. And you got to make sure that you're not just looking to one place, because what happens if that one place fails? You're screwed. You can't have all your grain in one bucket. Now, that's true for other resources that are less required for survival. Of course, you got to have food, but, more power, gold, silver, troops, political leverage, things like that. That is also where the greed comes in. Athens is going to be a little disappointing this episode. As a representative democracy, they're going to do a lot of very non-democratic things that are going to make me, and you as well, I assume, in some cases, frown a bit. But hey, this is real life, this is real history, and sometimes crappy people are in charge. We all know that. And these northern powers are really coming into their own with that regard. They're getting more understanding of how these southern states have gained so much power. And they, with these larger countries, are realizing that they have a lot of untapped power in the form of untapped wealth. And they're using that wealth to leverage their might as new kingdoms, right? For example, we saw how important Athens, their need was for timber and pitch, and Sparta started to attack the sources of timber and pitch, and that in turn affects Athens' navy. So when you think of these resources, timber, pitch, but also livestock and grain and silver and gold and iron and bronze, or the tin and the brass that you need to make bronze, there's all those things that are getting fought over, all those things that matter, whether it's to pay people, whether it's to make weapons, whether it's to feed people, whether it's for ships. The most horrifying resource of all, though, is people. And I mean that when they're made into a commodity. I mean slaves. Every Greek city-state, make no mistake, had slaves. So they're all bad in that sense. But there were widespread opinions, developing opinions that in the long term changed the view of what is and isn't proper in terms of servitude. It's a long-term process that went from, hey, maybe only these people should be enslaved, to maybe nobody should be enslaved. It took a while for people to get there. But in Greece, it started where, kind of in a way, it starts in a lot of places where they think they're the best. So they think that, no, only everybody else should be enslaved. Well, the Romans had a lot of the same ideal. Yeah, well, we're the best, so it's okay for us to enslave anybody else. But it's not okay to enslave our fellow Romans. There's obviously exceptions. Plenty of Romans were willing to enslave fellow Romans. But this was something there was a lot of pushback against in Greece. Some people thought it was totally fine, but a lot of people thought, no, we cannot be enslaving each other. Epaminondas, for example, was very big on no Greek should be enslaving any other Greek. Thebes in general didn't entirely share that, but Epaminondas really pushed it. Pelopidas was with him. He also was not an enslaver. He didn't like that. A lot of other people were like that, but most of the people in power lean towards slavery because, well, slavery helps people in power. They're the powerful people, and the slaves are the least powerful, so they benefit from this arrangement. But so it takes people who have ideology, who have philosophy, who think it's wrong, to push back against this. And of course, this gets into things that are very modern, like, well, if you're going to say only Greeks should be free, well, who is and who isn't Greek? What counts as Greek? What doesn't, right? That's when you get into purity tests and citizenship tests and who belongs and who doesn't. So, yeah, if any Greek city-state was in violation of this concept, it was definitely Sparta. Even though every city-state did it to some degree, they were the worst offenders. They were the most willing to enslave other Greeks, and they were the most willing to have an ordered hierarchy within their society where the rights flow from the top. So Sparta had enslaved their own neighbor for centuries. And as we saw at the beginning of the Battle of Leuctra, or the thing that led to the Battle of Leuctra, where Sparta was finally beaten, it was a disagreement over the slave state that started, or at least that was the leverage Epaminondas used to start this battle. Remember, Agesilaus wanted everyone to sign independently. And Epaminondas said, well, then we're going to sign as a group, as Thebes, because we're Boeotian. Everyone's in behind us. And he's like, no, you can't do that. You got to sign independently. So Epaminondas, if you remember, said, well, then Messenia has to sign separately from you. And he, of course, exploded in rage. How dare you? And then war. And then, of course, Sparta lost, putting them on the back foot. This is the only reason their war machine worked in the first place. The only reason their citizens could spend all day, every day, learning about war, tactics, toughening yourself, strengthening yourself, just learning authority, everything about war, spending all day and all night practicing war, thinking about war, all that. You can't do that if you don't have someone else making your food and doing all the other chores. Well, who did all the chores and the food stuff? Well, that's the people of Messenia. They were under the boot of Sparta for hundreds of years, perpetual servitude. And it wasn't just, right, they held them in this state. Of course, they had to do horrible things, like any people who were held in check for this long. To keep them down like that, you got to do really, really awful things. And pretty much people knew this. This is kind of wild that Sparta was able to just let this slide for so long. But on the other hand, it wasn't. It was because what was anyone going to do about it? Well, here comes Epaminondas, a guy who does not waffle on the issue of enslaved Greeks. He would not back down. He got everyone to start talking about it again, something that everybody just wouldn't talk about, like Fight Club. You don't talk about that. He got everyone talking about it. And the talk led to war. So yeah, he didn't waffle on that. And it's not just because waffles hadn't been invented yet. Because, surprise, waffles had been invented. That's right. I wrote this line, and then I was like, hey, when were waffles invented? Turns out waffles were invented in ancient Greece. Well, look at me. I have waffle on my face. They were called obilios or obelios. They were savory instead of sweet. It's real simple. You get an iron rod, you get a wooden rod with a metal plate at the end. Then you get another one, and you put some dough or some batter between that, and you hold it over a fire. The two plates hold over each other, and you get a little pancake type thing. So it's really more of a pancake than a waffle, a proto-waffle, if you will.
Depends on how bumpy those irons were, right?
Yeah, they could have been scraped and scratched, and probably added some grooves to the Greek pancake. And yeah, so maybe that's where the idea to make grooves on purpose came from. You never know. So yeah, waffles, the current version of waffles that we're all familiar with, did originate in Holland, in amongst the Dutch people, but the proto version was here in Greece. That made me laugh when I was writing this stuff. So yeah, so he didn't like the idea of Greeks enslaving other Greeks, and he thought it was like Greece should be more like a contest. He didn't think it should be like you beat your enemies and you enslave them. No, you beat them, and that proves you're better, and that proves you have the right to lead. But who are you going to lead if everyone you've beaten is enslaved? No, it's to be leadership, not servitude. He thought that it should be like a big Olympics. Let's all fight over who's the best. But we don't destroy the loser. The loser agrees to submit to the winner because they proved they were better. So he had it more like a let's contest for the supremacy rather than make it as bloody and ruthless as possible. Of course, he was in the minority. He believed in treating the defeated with honor and respect, didn't condone slavery, all that other stuff. He kept executions to a minimum, but he was in the minority with that. So these two factors, making Thebes more powerful than Sparta and freeing Messenia, were effectively the same goal. Because if you could cut Sparta off from their servitude, all the things that allowed them to focus entirely on warfare, well, then they would have to not focus entirely on warfare. That would be a huge blow to their entire way of life and the thing that made them such a military might for so long. But this is a big if, isn't it? A huge if. Agesilaus is still unbeaten, and he's not a fool. They know all this. Everything I'm saying about their source of power, they know where their source of power comes from. They know what's at stake. If they lose Messenia, that's really bad. And they knew he had brought the issue up. They saw how he wouldn't back down. So they know what he's about. They know he's got his sights set on them, but it's not so simple as him just saying, hey, I want to go march down. And he's not some king that can just decide to attack Sparta. So it's not so complicated. It is so complicated, isn't it? So let's get to it. A brilliant strategy, a man with the plan, not just to beat Sparta on the field, but to beat them forever. But could he execute it? Let's see. Let's start with Messenia. Since Messenia is so deep at the heart of these matters, let's get a little bit of additional context on this place. We've mentioned them a lot, but we haven't focused on them. Messenia is very old. Pylos, the city of Pylos was there. You might remember Pylos from your Trojan War era history. Nestor was the king of Pylos and was thus the king de facto of Messenia. He was the chief advisor to Agamemnon, and Agamemnon's brother was Menelaus, who was king of Sparta. So these are all really close together, too, as you can see, or as you're aware. Now, fast forward 500 years or so, this was 720 BC, so 350 years prior to our story. It's a story as old as time, except this is actually one of the older versions of this story that's older than time, which is two different cultures living next to each other. One has it a little easier because they got better food, they got more resources. So the other culture, meanwhile, gets tougher because they have to scrape and scrimp and live through hardships. And then one day they realize they're strong enough to beat these soft Greenlanders, like perhaps the Ironborn would refer to mainlanders or something like that. The real world examples are Legion, for example. Mongolia managed to conquer Imperial China. the Mongolians lived in horrible, difficult conditions, and it made them really strong, and they were able to use that strength against China. This is very similar. Sparta said, hey, Messenia assassinated our king. It might have been true. It's kind of dubious, but using that casus belli, they attacked Messenia and subjugated them. And like I said, held that for 350 years. There was only a few times Messenia was able to break free. The longest was about 17 years. Each time they broke free, each time they threw off Sparta, whether it was a temporary lapse of Spartan authority, one time there was an earthquake that broke Sparta up quite a bit, they would flee, the Messenians would flee to this mountain called Mount Ithome, which is a holy mountain to them, and it's very defensible. They could block the passes, and it would be really hard for Sparta to get up into that mountain to get at them. So each time you would see what Sparta would eventually do is they would besiege the mountain, sort of like the Lord's Declarant did to the Eyrie. The Eyrie has to have food sent up to it. They starve without that. And so the Lord's Declarant just camped their armies at the base of the mountain and said, hey, you guys, we're going to deny you food. That's basically what Sparta did each time to finish the siege of Mount Ithome. Each time Messenians had to resubmit. One time Messenia was strong enough to bring Athens in as a negotiator. Athens tended to support Sparta in spots like this, which is very frustrating because they're supposed to be not only Sparta's enemy, but they're supposed to be a democracy. So they're not really supposed to be about slavery, but as we said, even the Athenian Democrats own slaves. So this is, well, what ended up happening was Athens negotiated a deal where these Messenians could just leave. They could flee, they could move into an existing Athenian city, like start their own sort of quarter in that part of the city. Like, you know, you have like a Jewish quarter in a city, or a Muslim quarter in a city, or a Chinese quarter, things like that. But this was the Messenian quarter in a city called Naupactus. I don't know that it was actually a quarter, but you get the point. It was a lot of people. The other Messenians fled at various times into exile. There was a Messenian community in Libya. There was a Messenian community in Sicily called Messana. Almost the same name. Some of you all have probably heard of Messana. It's was renamed from the name Zankel to be called Messana because of so many Messenians. So think of Rhoynar. Think of the Rhoynar, scattered to many places after enslavement and semi-destruction of their homeland. But they're still out there, and they're hoping to get the call home. Well, it might happen. It might very well happen. There's a guy named Tertius. You may find this guy referred to as a Spartan poet. I really don't think he was Spartan. There's a lot of sources that say this guy wasn't Spartan. He was just writing about Sparta. Anyway, Tertius, that could absolutely pass for Valerian. And the Valerian methods of keeping their slaves down really remind me of what Sparta did here. So there's this poem he wrote. It goes like this. As asses worn by loads intolerable, so them did stress of cruel force compel. Of all the fruits the well-tilled land affords, the moiety to bear to their proud lords.
Can I tell you guys?
I was going to say this too, but you go ahead.
Yeah, I had to bow out of reading that one. If you can tell, I'm already laughing just thinking of as asses worn by loads intolerable.
Loads intolerable by asses?
Yeah, that's a wild first line. Okay.
This Tertius had a sense of humor here. But you get the point. If you can get through the laughter of that and realize we're laughing at slavery here, he wrote about the plight of the Messenians. Like the Spartans were so proud and authoritative, and all the work of the Messenians went to the Spartans. The people basically were reduced to what were called helotage. So the people were helots, and they were kind of like thralls. It's very, very similar to the semantic difference between slavery and thraldom, which is to say, not a lot. It's really similar here. I think there was in fact, I think one of the differences is very similar in that children of slaves are slaves. Children of thralls are free. Children of helots are still helots. So they're neither slaves nor free, but they're more just the same helot status. But it's a whole ball of wax that we wouldn't want to spend too much time on. But Sparta had all these things to like make it legal, to make it religiously proper. For example, each year they would declare war on the helot population, declare war on Messenia, just every single year. Even though it's like, you guys are completely under our yoke, but just to make it official. We're still at war with you guys. 100 years later, 200 years later, 300 years later, still at war. It's religiously correct, according to them. sad to say, as I have alluded to, Athens just repeatedly just helped Sparta. They just love the status quo. I don't know what it is about just the good old days of Athens versus Sparta. Well, Sparta would be like, hey, Athens, if we don't have Messenia, then we can't stand up to you. You guys are way bigger than us. It's only this that allows us to stand toe-to-toe with you guys. Let alone beat you as we have done in the past. So it's bizarre to me that that Athens is such a buddy up to Sparta so many times here, and the surprises will keep coming. But let's not forget about these resettled Messenian communities that are all over. They're very important, these Rhoynar-style communities. Now, in Game of Thrones, in the Westeros, Essos world, the Rhoynish people never did get to reunite. They remained scattered, and their cultural footprints have ended up in other places, like Dorne and some other places that we haven't gotten to focus of. But what's really interesting, too, about Sparta is they have these policies about the Messenians. They have all these things they did to keep them under control and all these different laws and regulations and religious beliefs. So much of it is hidden to us today because it was part of their policy to keep it hidden. Most countries, it's like the laws of the land. You want to make those laws as well known as possible so people follow them. Like, you can't follow a law you don't know exists. It's part of the complaint about the modern world, especially things like the tax code, is who could possibly know everything in it? Like, how can a citizen follow the laws when the laws are this complicated? So this is weird, right? Their whole thing is, we don't want foreigners to know what our laws are. We don't want them to because maybe they can take advantage of that somehow. Maybe they can abuse the law by figuring it out and honing in on where our weaknesses are. Because ancient Greece, like a lot of places, even now, the letter of the law is not as important as the spirit of the law. In court, it's the letter of the law usually that rules, which is not great. But this isn't court. This isn't modern times we're talking about. We're talking about ancient Greece, where the spirit of the law was very important. So by keeping these things on the down low and not talking about them, again, it brings me back to that reference I made at the beginning. They're truly the fight club of ancient Greece. Sparta is. I mean, their whole society is built towards fighting, and they don't talk about it. Right? They're the most laconic. The word laconic comes from Laconia. It's really just, they're really just living it as it is. They really did build that. Fight Club owes a debt of gratitude to ancient Sparta. Let's talk about the Crypteia. This is the most Fight Clubbish aspect of a very Fight Clubbish society. The Crypteia is a secret sort of assassin, secret police society within Sparta. They had their famously brutal upbringing for children of citizens called the Agoge. It's not as brutal as the training for Unsullied, but it's got a lot in common. It's, of course, full of stamina and strength and practicing with weapons and studying tactics and, of course, obedience, because this is Sparta, right? You got to be obedient in Sparta. That's part of it, which is wild to me, how often modern right-wingers try to evoke Spartan imagery, because while also being rugged individuals, Sparta was like the least individualistic society of all time. It's like war socialism or something. I don't even know. But yeah, it doesn't really fit. But this part, this is another one that's really gross. Modern far-right groups in Greece have adopted this Crypteia lore, this value system, which is really just disgusting. So we'll see here. Let me explain it to you. They would join. So when you're far enough along in the Agoge, like basically the equivalent age when you would be joining a fraternity or a sorority in college, so you've been through most of your education, you're getting near the end. Instead of a fraternity or sorority, I almost said Ferrari. Instead of a Ferrari, because they didn't have those in Sparta, you would join the Crypteia. I don't know whether it was some of them, most of them. Again, Fight Club, they didn't talk about it. We don't know. But we know some things. They would be unleashed on the Messenians to carry out terror attacks while simultaneously leveraging all their training to survive out in the wilderness around this thrall state they were deployed to. So it's part training, part state suppression, part of the plan. So you're deployed maybe in a group, maybe by yourself with just a tunic and a dagger. And you're like, you got to go to Messenia. You got to climb the mountain, get into their territory, go through their forests, and then you got to survive. And then that means stealing from them. That means killing them if you need to. And you're allowed to kill them. Especially if they're out at night, because Sparta enforces a nighttime curfew in Messenia. But this is Sparta. I forgot to pause in between the words there. This is now they're not going to spend their time with given their whole deal is learning war and training in war. They're not going to go patrolling Messenian neighborhoods to see who's up at night. That's beneath them. So the Crypteia can do that, though. Like, you got little secret police, little 20-year-olds running around with a knife and a tunic, trying to prove that they belong in Sparta's harsh military society. And to do that, well, you discipline the Messenians. You would sneak into their homes, steal their food, steal their stuff to be warm. Just prove you can survive out in the wilderness. It's like I said, it's a coming of age thing, but it's also a scare tactic. It's an enforcement tactic against these poor Messenians. And the Messenians, I call them poor because, goodness gracious, one of Sparta's tactics was to kill the most outstanding members of the society. Okay, so if you're, say, breeding plants, let's say orchids or something small scale like that, you tend to take the best looking ones and you replant those and just get rid of the other ones. You know, maybe you don't use those. You just take the nicest ones, the purest genetic ones. Now that's fine when you're talking about flowers, but when you're talking about people, that's all kinds of disgusting. But that's what Sparta was doing in reverse. Instead of getting rid of the weak ones, they got rid of the strong ones to keep the entire population weak. If you're good at something, they kill you. Unless it's like farming. If you display courage in battle, they might use that and then kill you. If you display intelligence, boldness, they kill you. And so the Crypteia were just sent in waves of these young men, just kill anyone who's too good, too great, too exceptional, and survive. It's pretty awful, right? But you can see how this would build really tough, brutal, young boys into men who would not flinch at killing and who would be used to enduring all sorts of hardships. But at the same time, you can say, God, that's terrible, but you could also understand why every Spartan soldier went through this. And that's why they're so dangerous. So, yeah, they really just had a license to kill Messenians anytime they want. Routinely to traumatize and trick and just keep these people in a state of constant fear. They would do things like, one time they called for helot soldiers to come forward, and they enlisted like 2,000 of them, and they just had them all killed slowly, and they just vanished them. Yeah, like, yeah, we want, like, just basically all you who are strong enough, volunteer, step forward. Okay, kill them. The ones that revealed themselves as strong, they just killed them. It was like, well, don't tell them you're strong. But how are they supposed to know? This isn't all written down. They didn't know that happened 100 years ago. They might have heard whispers, like people talk about these things, but yeah, it's not like books for them to go look at. So that's the Crypteia. Really awful. They appear in the Red Rising series too. They're attached to one of the particular great houses, and they're as nasty in Red Rising as they are in ancient Sparta. Let's talk about Macedonia. Let's catch up with them. We went in the extreme south of our theater, which is Messenia is in southwestern southern Greece. And this is, well, the northern rim. Alexander II, remember, his father, Epaminondas III, was dead, and he was immediately beset by problems because of his youth. The Illyrians were invading from the northwest, while this guy, Pausanias the Pretender, was backed by the Thracian king Cotys the First, who Cotys the First had Iphicrates as a son-in-law, by the way. So Pausanias is coming this way. Alexander's facing the Illyrians coming this way. But Alexander managed to wiggle out of it. He was able to get things together. His father had an alliance with Athens. He said, hey, I want to ally with Athens too. And Athens was all about it because, remember, this is one of the sources of timber. Macedonia has lots of forests. They're sending timber to Athens. Athens like, we definitely want to keep that going. So Iphicrates, not only is he married, not only is he an Athenian who is now the Athenians are now allied to Alexander II, but he's married to King Cotys I's daughter, who is an enemy of both. But he was also an adopted son-in-law of Epaminondas III. So he's a brother-in-law to this King Alexander. This is talking about, he has his feet in 3 camps. And that's hard to do because people don't have 3 feet. I just told you something that you really needed to know. So not only was Alexander struggling a little bit to keep his new kingdom together that he had disinherited from his father, well, he had a little help too. Again, Iphicrates. Eurydice the First, who was the queen of Amyntas, that's the mother of Alexander, she just flat out said, hey, Iphicrates, please protect my children. Please protect my sons and this line. And he's like, okay, yeah, I'll help. Sure. So Alexander was the oldest. There's also Perdiccas, and there's also Philip. Now, these are like the most common names in Macedonia. Alexander, Perdiccas, Philip, Ptolemy, and Eurydice, and lots of Amyntases and a few other names. These names are going to keep coming.
So like John, Tom, Dick. No.
Yeah, it's
Tom, Dick, and Harry.
Yeah, it's totally theirs. Or
that,
the Georges and the John of the Henrys and Roberts of England. Although, yeah, this is their batch of 5 names. So the one name I hadn't thrown out, the one name I mentioned but hadn't been included yet is a Ptolemy. But of course there is a Ptolemy. Eurydice had an affair with a royal cousin named Ptolemy of Aloros. He had been Amyntas's chief ambassador to Athens. Now, Athens tried to call everybody back together to renegotiate this peace deal. They like, hey, we tried to get a peace deal together, and instead Sparta and Thebes went to war, and they're still fighting. But the rest of us, hey, why don't we can still have the deal, right? Like, the deal was that every city-state's independent. Athens, Sparta, and Thebes are fighting over that very thing right now, but the rest of us, we can agree to that, right? A lot of them said, yes, we can. Everybody except the country of Elis. Elis being the people that host the Olympics. They're rich. They got horse country. They thought they were owed some territory owed by Sparta. Like Sparta took some of our territory. That shouldn't be independent. It should be ours. Sparta doesn't get to keep that. Especially, should either be independent or ours. It shouldn't be Sparta's. So anyway, this was an example of the problem with this arrangement. Athens got everybody to agree to this deal, but it was very poorly worded. It was not very specific. It didn't define independence very well. It didn't have an enforcement clause at all. It was just like, you can't do this. There was the or else was blank. It was like, or if you do this, we will. Yeah, so it was really weak, but it gave a lot of cities the excuse, at least something to point to say, hey, our independence is being violated. And so that started a lot of conflicts, as we will be seeing here. So you've got some instability just about everywhere except Thebes, right? Thebes is doing quite well. They're continuing to gain momentum. Things are going well. There's instability in the northern kingdoms. There's instability in Persia. There's instability in Sparta. There's just a lot of instability. And that is all the more to Thebes' benefit. So let's move on to the year 369. Although some of this started in the 370s, and an important to note that the dates aren't too specific here. We're trying to keep things together. The sources differ sometimes. Anyway, we have a campaign that begins in 370 and runs into 369. Let's just talk about it that way. To add confusion, there were 2 cities called Orchomenus that are both relevant today. One of them is Boeotian Orchomenus, so it's near Thebes. One of them is Arcadian Orchomenus, so it's in Arcadia. I'll sometimes say Arcadia, sometimes say Arcadia, because I'm inconsistent like that. Now, Orchomenus in Boeotia, the one near Thebes, they didn't really like Thebes. They were the one major holdout in Boeotia against Theban rule. They had a lot more wealthy families, more oligarchs. They didn't really like this new arrangement, this new state of affairs. Epaminondas led an army there and defeated them. And the Thebans were being kind of hot-headed and still kind of loving their new situation, maybe a little too much, were all about crushing. They wanted to enslave the Orchomenians and say, let this be a lesson to you and everybody else. And Epaminondas said, no! Any who aimed at supremacy over the Greeks ought to safeguard by their generous treatment what they had achieved by their valor. Repeating the earlier sentiment that this is like an Olympic thing. Beat them. Be content with that. Be the victor. Show everybody knows you won. Let that be what matters, not what you do to them afterwards. Again, though, not many people listen to that. He's dragging them along by force of will and his great personality and his consistency, but not a lot of Thebans are exactly with him on that in spirit. They're still very kill or be killed. They did this to us. Let's get them back. Yeah, very, very blood for blood type oriented. Let's discuss the Peloponnese real quick. We talk about it a lot, but we haven't zoomed in on it. I think, do we have a map here for this? No. Okay. Southern Greece is called the name the Peloponnese. It's in ancient and current times, it is divided into 7 regions. Very convenient for us that it was 7 regions back then. I'm sorry?
It'll be there in a moment.
Okay, cool. 7 regions then and now, and the regions are pretty much the same, so that's very convenient for us. Now, it's sort of a circle. Like there's Corinth, which is the biggest city in the Peloponnese. It's really important because it controls the isthmus. The isthmus, a tiny little strip that connects northern Greece to southern Greece. With that, if you can block that, pass off, you can cut any army off from entering. So Corinth is super important. Go down one, south from Corinthia, is Argolis. That's where Argos is. It's old and big and defensible. Their power more is in ancient times. They're stubborn, but they're not a big political player here. Next to the rotated kind of like clockwise here, next would be Laconia. That's Sparta. Then west of Sparta is Messenia. Messenia has the second most amount of fertile territory of the 7 regions of the Peloponnese. And of course, that's a big part of why Sparta subjugated them and why Sparta subjugating them had such a big effect. Next, going north is Elis. That's where the Olympics is again. The wealthy horse racing people. They have the most green space in the Peloponnese. So they have the most fertility, the best land for growth. Next is Achaia. That's the one we talked about last time, or maybe 2 times ago, where they had the Atlantis-like event. They're the ones that are entirely facing north into the Corinthian Gulf. They're not too important today, but they certainly deserve mention. Now, that's 6 of them. The 7th is Arcadia. They're in the middle. Every one of these regions borders exactly 3 of the others. Corinth borders Argolis and Achaia. Argolis borders Corinth and Laconia. Except for Arcadia, because they're in the middle. They border all 6. So they're kind of like the Riverlands in that sense, where they're in the middle of everything, but there's not a lot of rivers. They're more like, in culture, they're more like Barrowton. They're more like the Barrowlands, because Arcadia is the oldest. It has the oldest people. It has the first men of Greece, the Pelasgians. That's a nationalistic call we're going to see for them. Is like, hey, we're the original Greeks here. I mean, there were probably people that came before them, but it's a claim they can make because it's at least true to everybody else. They're at least older than everybody else around. It's also the place where like Hermes and Pan are said to have come from. It's very hilly. It's got the only big lake in southern Greece. The big places there are Mantinea, Tegea, and Orchomenos. And each of those 3 control one of the most fertile areas. There's 3 really fertile regions, and those 3 have one of each. So that's that. That's the Peloponnese and the 7 regions. Now, Arcadian League. Let's talk about that. If you recall, Mantinea was the place very close to Sparta, and that didn't change. They didn't move. They were given the reins of Castamere treatment and scattered into villages. Remember, the river was diverted into their city, and it melted their mud brick walls, and then they were forced into stasis, which is a condition where your town is broken up into villages and forced to stay small. Because of this new peace deal from Athens that everybody besides Sparta and Thebes signed, and because Sparta was on the back foot, Mantinea said, here's our chance to reform. We can go ahead and regroup, ignoring the Spartan authority. We can become a city again. So Agesilaus shows up, not with an army, he just shows up with a detachment. He's like, hey guys, wait, what are you doing here? Why are you guys, what's happening? He sees them building walls too, not mud brick this time, stone walls, real walls. He goes, y'all, hey, wait, hold up. Why don't you just put a pause on that? Just wait, just give it a minute, maybe a few weeks. We'll give you approval and even help pay for it. They're like, yeah, I don't believe you. And so he went home. And they were right not to believe him, most certainly. They kept going. The walls, they made big walls with guard towers and all the good stuff. Everything that would keep Sparta off of them. And remember, 2 days walk from Sparta. 2 days walk from Sparta. The standout leader here was a Mantinean patriot named Lycomedes. So he had grown up in this situation of the villages been scattered. He may have been alive when they were scattered and had to live under these new conditions. So very, very demeaning, very not great. And they would love to go back to where they were to regain their what had made them strong in the first place. They've got a really fertile region. They should be a strong city. What's Sparta going to do about it? They basically said. Lycomedes is a real rabble-rouser, real patriot, Arcadian patriot, Mantinean patriot, and he warned against Sparta coming back. He's like, hey, we got to keep that. He also started to warn against about anyone else coming. He was like, well, we need to be independent. For the short term, we might need a little help, but let's look to the future. I don't want like Thebes or Athens to just become the next Sparta to us. We were under their yoke. We don't want to trade one master for another. Let's be on our own. He starts working on that sentiment, that kind of thing that starts to take hold, but it takes a while. It builds, but it's not going to blow up right away. We'll keep an eye on that. Remember the other two important cities, Orchomenos and Tegea, were nearby. At Tegea, things started to go a little bit the other way. The oligarchs started to see which way the wind was blowing, and they started to make their move, and Sparta sent some support to them. But the Mantinean Democrats got wind of it and sent their own support and won out. So Tegea was also ruled by Democrats in this point. Then Argos, which is a different region, as we said, that's the bottom right corner of Greece, or maybe just the eastern part. They got into a brutal civil war between Democrats and oligarchs. We've heard it before, right? Democrats versus oligarchs. It's happened so many times throughout these episodes, but it's getting bloodier. Each time it happens, there's a little less honor. There's a little less restraint to the defeated. There's a little less, hey, we can't trust them to just accept defeat. People, the pattern of exiles getting kicked out, then coming back with friends and kicking out the winners and then back and forth. That pattern was getting bloodier and bloodier and less repetitive because people weren't allowing it to repeat. It's like, why do we keep letting this pattern repeat? Just kill them all and it won't repeat. Well, that's not true. It will repeat and it'll just be bloodier when they get their revenge. So that's what happened here. It was the worst, actual worst example. I was pumping up this episode as the bloodiest example of that. It literally is. The Argosian Democrats turned into something like the mob during a Clash of Kings when they're just like turning on people who really weren't bad guys and bad guys at the same time. Just anybody. They were just turning on people that like had semi-fancy clothing. It's kind of what happened here. Some demagogues really fired up the crowd about some rich folk, some particular rich folk. Maybe because they were really bad people. Maybe because it was just a demagogue taking an opportunity. I don't know. We don't even know what this guy's names were, what these demagogues' names were. Whether the demagogues were right or whether they were exaggerating, we don't know. Either way, it had a huge effect. The rich folk either were the monsters that they were pointed out to be, or they became it in response because they were under such pressure here. They plotted to overthrow the democracy in response to these charges brought against them. But the Democrats found out about that and caught most of the rich folk who were planning to overthrow the democracy. Many of them were tortured. Well, that's not true. One of them was tortured. The rest killed themselves because they knew they would be tortured. And the one guy who was tortured just pointed out to maybe get out of the torture. He pointed out more rich people that could be targeted. He wasn't actually naming conspirators. He was just naming more people. And the mob went and took those people and brutally killed them and took all their stuff. Eventually, it got so bad that the demagogues who started it were like, oh my God, what have we done? This is going too far. They tried to stand up to the crowd and like, y'all, we're going too far. The crowd killed them too. Yikes. It got so bad, like total mob rule. This is the moon of the three kings in Argos, except there were no three kings. There was just a mob. There was no Tristan Truefire or Sir Perkin the Flea or Sylvana Sand. None of these people emerged. As far as we know, maybe they did. We just don't have their names anymore. Either way, Argos became a mess, And there were refugees fleeing in many directions. Oligarchic refugees fled to Laconia to get Spartan support. Democrats fled in a variety of directions, some westward into Arcadia, some north towards maybe Athens. Just bad. And many people were getting killed along the way, people killing each other, etc. Just a huge mess. Meanwhile, Lycomedes keeps pushing this nationalistic idea. Hey, Arcadia, let's all get together. Let's work together. Let's do one of these leagues. There's the Boeotian League. There's the Delian League. There's all these other leagues. Let's make our own league of just Arcadia, the Arcadian League. And at this point, enough time had passed. It was formally announced. It was a thing. Enough people had supported it. The ball was rolling. A mutual defense pact for Arcadia with votes for each city, with tax structures, all sorts of arrangements. Agesilaus, after his attempt to talk to them, was like, all right, y'all, I declare war on Mantinea. He was like, basically his plan was, well, if I can take this effort out early, this league won't form. But it had the reverse effect. There were still some people on the shelf, on the fence, like, do we want to join this league? There's lots of problems with leagues. Like, this league could just become oppressive in the same way Sparta is, or in a similar way. Are we sure that this is better? But then Sparta attacks, and like, well, lesser of two evils is really showing up here, or the worst of two evils, if you look at it that way. Sparta is the worst of two evils here, attacking us, so we better take the lesser of two evils and form this Arcadian League after all. So it worked. Agesilaus sort of self-fulfilled prophecy there, and the Arcadian League started to really form and take shape. Archimedes, though, continued to hold out. They're like, nah, we're not joining the Arcadian League. You can join Tegea, you can join Mantinea, and all the smaller cities can join, but we're not joining, and we're big enough to resist on our own, especially because we got Spartan support. And Sparta was supporting Archimedes. They sent a guy named Polytropus, and they brought some Argive oligarchs, some refugees to stiffen their forces. They had extra dudes to help them out. And there were some other Spartan-friendly Arcadians here and there who joined as well. So Lycomedes brings an army over, and they have a battle. And Polytropus and 200 guys are slain. So the Democrats win this one as well. And some flee back inside Orchomenus, others flee to Sparta. And again, Agesilaus gets an army together and comes to try to fight the Mantineans and the rest of the Arcadians. They don't actually have a pitched battle. I think that even though Agesilaus had smaller men, the Mantineans were still a little wary about fighting them. So they didn't come in direct conflict. Agesilaus just started burning farms, destroying houses, taking loot, kind of what the Arcadians had done in other places and against their enemies. So, but in other cases, Agesilaus was sort of playing like a propaganda game. Other villages, he paid for all the food. He didn't do things that armies normally do. He didn't just take what he wanted and say, deal with it. No, he was kind, probably for reasons of politics, and pragmatism, not for reasons of actual kindness. But it's interesting that just goes to show that certain towns he viewed as, they're never going to be on our side. We would just destroy them. Certain towns, we can probably win them over. And the ones that we can win over, we should. So let's be nice to them. So it was a little of this, a little of that, depending. At one point, though, even though Agesilaus was not wanting to necessarily come to a battle with them, and they didn't necessarily come to a battle with him because neither side was really sure how it would go. Agesilaus had fewer men, which bothered him. The other guys were way less experienced, and it's still Sparta. They're like, I don't know if we want to fight Sparta. So there was maybe a little bit of the armies were avoiding each other just to show how tough they are, but Agesilaus accidentally got his army trapped in a valley, and it looked really bad. But he just pulled a maneuver. He just out-generaled them and tricked them and was able to extricate his soldiers using sort of a fake-out move that's kind of hard to explain. Even the ancient sources aren't exactly clear on what he was. The point is he outmaneuvered them, proved that he was the better general, which they kind of already knew but didn't like to admit. So this was kind of a stalemate. And what they go back to is the formation of this league. They're like, okay, well, we saw what happens here. We see what's at stake. just the idea of a league is a threat to Sparta. Doesn't that prove that it's something we should do? Sparta thinks it's a threat to them. That's the point. We want it to be a bulwark against them. We want this kind of defense. And they knew amongst themselves already that they would never be able to pick one of the three big cities as the chief. Mantinea is never going to agree to let Orchomenos be the big one of the three, to be the capital of the Arcadian League. Tegea is not going to agree to let Mantinea. None of the three are going to agree to let the other one be the one invested with the cap power of government. So they had to agree to build a new city. Here we go. This is why this episode's called A Tale of Three Cities, or Three Free Cities, or whatever, because this is the first of the three. But they didn't just do it on their own. They're like, well, the idea of building a league, which isn't actually like a constructed object, it's a arrangement, an alliance, offended the Spartans so much. What happens if we actually build a city, with a new city with walls? They hated Mantinea. That's a rebuilding. That's one of the free cities. That's two right here. We got Mantinea and this new idea for an Arcadian city. So Arcadia's like, well, we want to in the long run be independent, but we still need help. Especially if we're going to do this, especially if we're going to form this league, there's going to be too many holdouts. To get this thing going, we're going to need some outside help. So they went to Athens. They went to Athens and said, hey, help us out. Help us build democracy in the South. And Athens is like, Athens at this time was under the leadership, unofficially, because he was just the leading man. He wasn't like the top elected official. There is no such thing. A guy named Callistratus. And Callistratus's perspective, ever since some of the Athenian setbacks of the last few years, was let's just stay out of it. Let's just keep doing our navy stuff that the rest of Greece just doesn't really get involved in, and just stay out of all the land-based difficulties. Let's not try to get embroiled in all these alliances. And for the most part, his party, people who followed that objective, people who liked that philosophy, were winning out. They were like, yeah, let's rebuild. Athens is better when we stay out of things. We can have some small alliances here and there, but nothing that's going to pull us into a war. We want to just sit back, build our stacks, and let Thebes and Sparta, they can fight each other. Let's let them do it, Let's let them tear each other apart while we rebuild. There's a certain sense to that, but there's also a downside, which is that, well, if Arcadius passes through Athens and says, okay, well, you aren't going to help us, we're going to go ask Thebes. That just brings more prestige to Thebes. That just elevates Thebes even more in the eyes of all the fellow Greeks as the defenders of democracy, as the ones that are the go-to. So Athens' prestige is lowered. It's not, they're sitting there building wealth and doing really well as that goes, but they're losing prestige in terms of ideology, in terms of who's great. It's like, you guys have money, but like Persia has money. We don't like Persia. Their culture is too much money makes you weak. We kind of don't like that, in fact. All you city dwellers, like Westeros, most of Greece was not city dwellers. And here we are talking about cities and new cities and all that. It's a real shift, a real paradigm shift. So Thebes said, yeah, we'll help. That's us. We are the guys. We want to be on top. We want to flex our might. Epaminondas and Pelopidas had been elected Boeotarch. That's Theban general. There's 7 spots for that office every year. All 7 went to Arcadia. They invited them to come. Sparta's years of bullying and high-handedness and lack of justice, it really came back to bite them. There were so many people willing to help the people that were standing up to Sparta. Hey, you're fighting Sparta? I'm on your side. I hate Sparta too. So a really big army formed. Huge numbers of former Spartan subjects and people wronged by Sparta were ready to join the army that was Epaminondas' to lead. The other Boeotarchs were there, but Epaminondas was the top guy. So this isn't like a call to arms that takes a long time. Like, everyone, send out the word. We're going to march on Sparta. That is what happened. But again, Greece is so small. People are hearing about this the next day. People are marching that same day. Horses are riding out to the villages. People are leaving right then. 70,000 men is what we're told. It may have been as small as 50, but y'all, the largest army in the history of Westeros was the Field of Fire. That was 55,000. Greece is tiny compared to Westeros. 70,000 is enormous. And it formed really fast, as I said. So Now, Epaminondas was all about the idea of this Arcadian League. He's like, yeah, it's a check against Sparta. We prefer to, as the Boeotian League, we prefer to negotiate with one point of contact rather than having to do alliances with each individual city, which gets so messy. We've seen the problems that arise when I'm your ally and I'm also their ally. Now you two are fighting. Which side do I take? If I'm going to betray somebody, better to just all be allies together and not fight, right? So that was good. That was a good part of the arrangement. But also, it's just the right thing to do in his mind. Philosophically correct. Democracy, independence, all these things are better. Willing allies rather than allies that have to be forced into it. And he liked this idea of a city, too. He thought, hey, city, good call, guys. Do that. And guess what? I got 70,000 troops. That's a lot of laborers. The Roman army, perhaps of all armies of all time, knew how to make use of soldiers as things other than soldiers. Like they would build a fortified camp every night while on campaign, a whole fort, not just like some ditches and some stakes, like a fort with floors and towers. So this isn't that, but it's us. This isn't what the Greeks did on a regular basis, but these soldiers, every single one of these guys has like worked on building their own house. Like every single one of these guys has building skills, all 70,000 of them. They all have something they can contribute. And so it's an army that was there to make sure this city building project goes off without a hitch. But it's also there to actually build it. I mean, they're 2 days away from Sparta. An army could come and stop them, but not this size effort. They're not going to stop this many people. Megalopolis. That's right. If you know your Greek roots, polis means city, mega means great. So it's great city. It really was. It was built on a plains, but Arcadia is very elevated. So it's an elevated plains. Most of Arcadia is hills and mountains, but this was on a big plains. The city was a clever mix of a new design and a federal city where it was a government city. Like it was built to be a capital. So it was on two sides of the same river. The north side was where people would live and like regular folk would live. And the south side was where they would have barracks, council buildings, government stuff, tax collection. They would collect taxes from the rest of all the Arcadian cities to pay for all this. And it was kind of like the Harrenhal of southern Greece. It was built to be huge. Great city. They expected a lot of people to live there. The assembly, the citizen assembly, was called the 10,000. Of course, at the beginning, there was not 10,000. And there was a problem here. Where are they going to find all the people to live in this city? Most of Greece is very rural. As I said, most people don't live in cities. So all of a sudden, you're going to take these people that have lived in villages and hovels for forever. That's the only thing they've ever lived in. Their family's family, their parents. They only ever lived in like shacks and hovels and things like that. They're like, no, we need you to move into the city. And this was a little more than just encouragement. I think there was some maybe even forcing of people to go, you got to go live in the city now, dude. Take your whole family. You got to live there. You need a lot of people to make this work. You need shops, you need markets, you need vendors, you need arrangements, you need shipments, you need so much. It's crazy to think about. It's also something you need government. They called Plato. There's another thing about this era that just blows my mind. They just called up Plato and were like, bro, we need a constitution. You're good at that sort of thing. They got Plato to come help with their constitution. Wow. That's just insane, right? But also a really good idea. Like Plato knew what he was doing. So the people of Arcadia had to give up a lot. Like this is really tough to get all these rural people to be taxed more heavily, to maybe have to live in different places. But on the other hand, the alternative is Sparta. Sparta's going to come back. How have the last several hundred years gone without this? Constant attacks by Sparta, constant this and that. Maybe this is bad, but it's probably better, right? Now, Thebes was really good at wall building. This is a technological advancement that they excelled in as far as Grecians go. They were the best wall builders in Greece in this era. They were good at fort building. They were good at wall building. All the different aspects of it. They figured out a way to link stones together with brackets, something that is common nowadays, I think. It wasn't so much then. So it's cement holding it together and metal binding. So very good wall building. 5.5 miles of walls were built around Megalopolis. thick and tall as well. Double wall, in fact. This was overseen by Epaminondas. As the Epaminondas was out doing other things, the armies around there nearby, specifically 1,000 men were sent specifically just for this task. So we hadn't heard Epaminondas' name in a while. If you recall, he's one of the original founders of the Sacred Band. He was a big proponent of the concept that paired lovers fighting side by side would be the best. Sparta hated this. They hated Epaminondas, they hated the Sacred Band, and they hated walls. They had a very Dothraki-like opinion of walls. Agesilaus once said, when asked, "Hey, aren't these great walls?" He said, "Yes, for women." Good old ancient sexism. The citizen standing army was formed as well. They were called the Epareti, picked men, 5,000 guys. If that sounds like a lot, if that sounds expensive, you're right. We've been going through this warlord era in Greece where a lot of powerful people just carved out kingdoms because they had enough money to hire a bunch of soldiers and then used that kingdom to keep funding those soldiers. Jason of Pherae, Dionysius of Syracuse, for example, or just the entire Persian Empire. So this is a really great endeavor. You got to figure out how to pay for all these things. You got to figure out how to govern it all, but it's very worthwhile. Now, plenty more to come on this, but let me just fast forward to 2026 just for some fun trivia here. It's still there. Megalopoly instead of megalopolis. Its population is under 10,000. It's not so mega. It's under 10,000 people, but it's still called Great City. Hey, it can still be great. Small places can be the best places. I'm not about saying bigger is better. Not for cities, that's for sure. But it is ironic that it's built so big and Harrenhal-like, and it's not in terms of population. Also kind of cool though, this is the area myth-wise where the Greeks thought that the Olympian gods did battle with the giants because there were lots of bones found there, lots of big bones, which in modern times we know, no, those are fossils, these are dinosaur bones, but back then they were like, whoa, giant bones, that must be from giant creatures, which they were, but not exactly how they imagined it. I did a lot of reading for this episode and the ones before and after. I continue to do a lot of reading for it. There's so many fun ancient sources. I have a good time with it. Shay has seen me reading random books in random places. I'm just sitting there at breakfast with my coffee, reading some Greek history book.
No more for me, it's that you have your ring light on at your computer desk, and I'm like, what are you doing? And you're like, I need the light to read this book.
So I got stacks of books here and there, but I also listen to a lot of history books while I'm out and about, while I'm doing chores, while I'm buying groceries or feeding the cats or whatever. So I have some recommendations for you all. You can get them on Audible. My chief source for this series of episodes is The Sacred Band by James Romm. The audiobook is great. You can also get the physical copy if you prefer. I've also been listening to a lot of Plutarch's lives. Plutarch covered the life of Agesilaus, the life of Artaxerxes, the life of Pelopidas. He also covered the life of Epaminondas. Unfortunately, that one was lost. We do not have the record of his life of Epaminondas. That's really, really sad. But also Phocion, also Demosthenes, a ton of people in this era he wrote about. You can get that on Audible for free. Some of these really ancient stories are completely free. You don't have to spend a credit or even anything. It's just completely part of the library. If you sign up for Audible and have a subscription, you get that with it. Another recommendation I have is Children of Ash and Elm. That was the main book I used as a source for our Hugo-nominated Ragnarok versus the Long Night episode. Fire and Blood would be a great audiobook to listen to. Do Game of Thrones. If you haven't done Game of Thrones on audio before, give it a shot. Some people don't love the audio version. Some people do. I'm more in the latter. I really like it. I've listened to it a ton of times. The Hedge Knight, different reader, different story. Red Rising, I've mentioned that. I mentioned it on and off here and there. Lots of Game of Thrones references, lots of Greece and Roman history in Red Rising, both references to, and their the noble society, the most powerful people, the oligarchs in Red Rising are obsessed with Greek and Roman history. So that's really fun. I love the series Black Sun. Dune is coming back around. Of course, the third movie this year. Great time to listen to those audiobooks. That's how I went through the series. I read the first one and listened to it, but all the other 6 I just listened to. A lot of them have multiple readers, voice actors doing different voices. So that's really cool. A recent favorite, Crossroads of Ravens. That's the latest Witcher novel. That's available on audio. Project Hail Mary is a real popular movie right now. And Ashay and I just got back to Interview with a Vampire last night. The TV show came back, season 3, Vampire Lestat. Those books are also available on audio. Quite a lot of them, really. There's a huge series, Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles. And speaking of our Ragnarok versus the Long Night episode, the Hugo voting is still open. That's until August 8th. You got a little bit of time. Buy that World Science Fiction Society membership or WorldCon membership, and you get the Hugo Voters Packet for $50. You get to vote, and you get every single nominated game, every single nominated book, novel, novella. Oh, not every single one?
No, they don't have every single thing.
Oh, they don't? Most of them.
No.
Okay, my bad.
And the game codes go quickly.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize those were limited. Thanks for the correction. Okay, well, you get the books for sure. Those are unlimited, and you get them in both audio and readable formats. That's really cool. So maybe not quite as many things as I said, but a lot. It's an incredible value. So check that out. And also, of course, you get to vote for us. All of this you can find by going to historyofwesteros.com. We have links to all of it, and you can go from there. Roundheaded Gaul sends a super chat, says, hi to all round-headed humanity. I'm not really sure what that means, but hi.
No, not to egg, his egg head. No, I'm joking.
Not egg-shaped, round-shaped, yes. Yeah. Well, yes. Many different heads have many different shapes. This next section is called To Laconia. With so much going so well in the Peloponnese in terms of anti-Spartan activity, Epaminondas and Pelopidas decided it was time to further press their advantage. They convinced the other Boeotarchs, along with the Arcadians, many of whom were the first ones to suggest this, go to Sparta. Take this army directly into Spartan territory. In an anecdote that may remind you of Pherae versus Cranagman, the Argives, who of course are neighbors to the Spartans, once quipped that there were thousands of dead Spartans buried in Argive soil. But the Spartan who heard this in this apocryphal story said, yeah, that's true. And there are no dead Argives on Spartan soil. He really turned it around on that guy, right? Yeah, there's lots of dead Spartans in your soil because we've invaded you so many times, but you've never invaded us because you're weaker. So he kind of won that exchange, I'd say, on the old on the old quips there. So it just hadn't been done. No one had invaded Sparta in 500 years. 500 years. Agesilaus liked to brag, and he probably wasn't the only one, that Sparta has never seen the cook fires of the enemy. They don't need walls. They don't have walls. Sparta is its own walls. The people of Sparta are the walls. Yep. Time for some of those boasts to be put to a test, I suppose. Now, the problem here with Epaminondas and Pelopidas was that Boeotarchs a yearly office. They're elected to this position. And if you exceed your term of office, it's a capital punishment. You die. You executed if you exceed your term of office. They're really, really, really worried about what charismatic generals will do if allowed to hold on to control their army. Like, look what Julius Caesar did many years later. That's exactly how he overthrew the Republic, by keeping his army for longer than he was supposed to and really, really winning them over to him. So that's the problem. They're like, well, if we go attack Sparta, there's no way we're going to get back in time to turn over the reins of power for the next election. But they decided that it would be more against the spirit of the law to not take this opportunity to beat this ancient, overmighty, overarching foe. It's got to do it. Now, it's not as simple as just marching south. As small as this region is, it's highly separated by mountains and hills and all that. That's part of why these 7 regions are so distinct, and still are, because those mountains are still there. So think of how, when Victorian had to send the Iron Fleet to Slaver's Bay. He did not think it wise to have them all go at once, because there would be no way to get enough supplies for such a large fleet along the way. So he split it into squadrons, 3 squadrons, and then arranged a meeting point. This is what Epaminondas did as well. He said, there's 4 passes into Sparta. They might block one or more of them. I doubt they can block all four because their manpower is too low right now. But if they block, any one of those, they don't need a lot of manpower to hold a pass, right? That's pretty standard. And that is where we get to a huge variety of reactions here. The 4 different armies are split, 4 different passes. One army, the locals are so happy to see them that they're like, yo, we've got secret hidden passes that we never showed the Spartans. We're going to show them to you. Meanwhile, another pass, there's a Spartan garrison, a guy named Agesilaus, who decides he's the next Leonidas, and this mountain pass is Thermopylae, and he will not yield. And they all die, just like at Thermopylae. It was very conspicuous. So it kind of inspired a lot of Spartans to be, hey, we're still Spartans. This is still who we are. That Leonidas was over 100 years ago, but we are still capable of this type of bravery. So even though it was kind of almost pointless because there were 4 passes and the other armies got through just fine, and that army got through too. So it didn't really militarily, it didn't accomplish much, but boy, did it send a message that this is still who Sparta is. Because they didn't have the ability to stand up to this army straightforwardly. So they didn't. There was panic in Sparta, the type of which that had never really been seen. They put out the call to arm helots. Very risky. Let's arm our slaves. That won't go badly. They armed 6,000 slaves. Now, 6,000 slaves versus 1,000 of their own and 4,000 Corinthians. So the slave portion outnumbered, and they're not technically slaves, but you get the point, outnumbered the non. So you could see why they were real nervous about this arrangement. Like, are these guys just going to turn on us any minute now? A lot of them did just desert. You're like, here, give me my spear, my shield, bye. They're taking off. And some of them even switched sides. They didn't just leave. They joined Epaminondas. At one point, this big group left. Now, they didn't take their shields with them. They would take take other weapons with them, but they didn't take the shield because it's painted like a Spartan shield. What good is that? Like, you're going to think I'm a Spartan. Now, this had a chilling effect, though, on Spartan morale. You wake up first thing in the morning, and there's a bunch of abandoned shields just sitting there. That's a bad thing for morale. You look around, you see, each one of those shields represents a deserter. Each one of those shields represents someone we were counting on that might now be against us. That is bad for morale. It's also just bad for their chances in general. So Agesilaus, though, clever guy, really understands morale. We've seen him just flat out lie to his soldiers before. He saw this coming. He understood. He got wind of it. And he sent out a detachment early in the morning from then on. Every there was like a sweep of shield. Like if there's a shield, if you find an abandoned shield, pick it up. So then the morning would come and there wouldn't be any abandoned shields. That doesn't mean people didn't desert, but the effect on morale was much lesser because no one would see the shields. Now, crazy enough, though, even though they were desertions, the vast majority of these helots actually stayed loyal to Sparta. Like, this says some very strange things about human nature and subjugation and long-term cultural trauma and words that I can kind of make up here. It's wild, isn't it? Like they were that inured to it. They were that used to it, I guess. I don't know. It's the psychology of this is very difficult. A good example of how much fear there was in Sparta over how this could go is the Spartan diplomat Antalcidas, the one who arranged the peace of 387, who spent a lot of time in Persia, like just with the ear of Artaxerxes. He took his family and sent them to an island nearby. He was that worried about stuff. Now, so Epaminondas ravaged a lot of the countryside. There was just mass destruction of Spartan manors, estates, property, loot taking, this and that. They went all the way down to the port, the Spartan port called the Gythium. They weren't able to capture it outright, but they did do some serious damage. And all along the way, every time they hit a farm or this or that, they free whatever helots they could find, and many of whom would join them. So their army just keeps getting bigger. One of the people who had to flee their estate in advance of Epaminondas' army was none other than Xenophon, who was one of our sources. He's the Athenian author guy was a soldier and was a pro-Spartan Athenian. He lived in Sparta, as you can see, and he was a best friend of Agesilaus himself. So he was, of course, as we've said many times, very biased towards Sparta. And this, of course, isn't exactly going to help his bias, the fact that the enemy commander is driving him off of his own land. Xenophon, as I think I've mentioned before, his own sons were educated in Sparta. They entered the Agoge, and we're actually going to hear about them in our story eventually here. But not today. Epaminondas marched directly to Sparta next. They marched along the Eurotas River, of which Sparta was on the other bank. So they're on the north side of the river, and Sparta lies on the south side. The river in this time of year was running high and cold. It's a snow melt river. It comes from these Greek mountains that are all over the place. So it's really bad. It's hard to cross. And, they don't have some of the things that, they're not like Romans where they just build bridges wherever they go. So river crossing is a very dangerous thing. You have a bunch of extra men. It doesn't really help you. Your extra men don't help because only a few men can fight at a time in this narrow area. It's sort of like a mountain pass. So he went to the bridge that Sparta uses, and Sparta had already very fortified that bridge. Epaminondas is like, yeah, we're not going to try to force that bridge. I don't want, that's not the right contest for us. That doesn't help us use our numbers to the advantage. So he sends out a whole bunch of dudes, tries to find another place to cross. Sparta's well aware of the strategy. They saw that coming, so they send detachments all over the place, watching the army, just keeping track of where the bulk of Epaminondas' army is. And it basically works. Epaminondas has such a huge army. It's not like there's forests around here. This is pretty wide open space. So you just can't hide. It's too hard to be sneaky. He could have done something like maybe sent out a smaller detachment in secret to try to find another way across. But Sparta was too ready for this. They were watching every part of the river. So the Thebans, and at one point, Agesilaus says about Epaminondas, he says, "Oh, man of great deeds." And apparently he wasn't being sarcastic. He was genuinely in awe of Epaminondas. And if you're a Spartan, a badass military commander of this society that's just all about war, I could see why you would respect this guy that is beating you. Like, man, how is he doing this? Props. I don't get it. He's good at this. And but Sparta refused to take the field. They're like, hey, Thebans were out there taunting them. There's just individual Theban soldiers are out there yelling, hey, come fight us. Hey, you guys, you cowards, aren't you? What's up with that? You weak fools. Aren't you Sparta? Hey, isn't this Sparta? This is Sparta. Where's the fight? The Spartans were mad about this. They didn't like being taunted, but they had to keep their discipline. They followed orders. It just allows us like, no, we're not gonna take the field against that. We're gonna lose. We gotta wait. We gotta maintain. We gotta do our thing. This army isn't gonna be here forever. They can't feed this army. We gotta just outlast them. They tried to cross in a few places. They got blocked. Eventually they did force a crossing. And things got worse in Sparta. There was a conspiracy. 200 guys decided, we're going to get the hell out of here. We're going to turn tail and run. And so what they did was they decided to sneak away. They were like, okay, we get our 200 guys. We're going to go over here. We're going to go into this Spartan fort. Take position there. This is where we're supposed to be. That's not where they were supposed to be, but they were pretending that's where they were supposed to be. Agesilaus, once again, someone always tells. This guy's intelligence network was crazy. He always seems to know. So he finds out about this, and he goes there by himself. He walks up to these rebels with just himself and one slave. He's like, hey guys, something must have gotten screwed up with the orders. You guys are supposed to be over in this fort over there. And they're like, oh, he doesn't know. He doesn't know we're rebelling. He doesn't know. Let's just go along with this. We'll go along with his orders, and then we'll keep moving, and then eventually we can get out. So they leave the fort. They start heading to the other fort, and that's when Agesilaus springs the trap. He's like, I knew you guys were rebels. So he kills the ringleaders of the 200 and lets the other ones go. And there was another plot, a second plot that we don't get the details of, but he had to put down two different conspiracies with the Theban army getting so close. But Epaminondas didn't attack Sparta directly. He knew that what he was up against. He's like, man, you cannot, they don't have walls, but they have roof tiles. All these ancient houses have these big stone roof tiles. They're like and they break into shards when you throw them. So this is extremely standard practice when a city like this, whether it's medieval or ancient, the armies are in the streets. It's really hard. You can't keep your formations. Citizens just be climbing up on roofs, throwing these slate tiles at you, and they will kill you. They are hurled from the height of 1 or 2 or 3 stories. The very famous general Pyrrhus, the guy who Pyrrhic victory is named after, he was killed by one of these roof tiles after an astonishingly successful military career about 100 years from now. So these things were dangerous. So Epaminondas was not like, yeah, we can overpower them, but we would lose thousands and thousands and thousands of men. That was not what he was about. He wasn't about taking big losses to make a point. No, he's not willing for things to get that bloody when it doesn't have to be. He always preferred the less bloody situation, even though he was more willing to go to war than just about anyone. He still didn't want it to come to a bunch of people dying. As backwards as that might sound, it does. There is logic there. He knew Agesilaus would just go down fighting. He's like, man, they will fight to the last man. Also, again, food, 70,000 men. You're also trying to build a city nearby and another city nearby. It's just too much. The outlook here isn't great, even though you've got Sparta on his heels. There's better ways to go about this. The campaign acquired a lot of wealth, even though it didn't destroy Sparta or take Sparta, so they took a lot of that money and reinvested it in Megalopolis. This was also very, very galling to Sparta. Their own wealth being made into defenses against them, into walls. They hate walls. Their money being used to build walls. How embarrassing is that? It's very embarrassing. You can understand why this warlike culture started to rebel against their own leadership, even though that is the most anathema. You do not go against authority in Sparta. So no one had invaded Sparta in 500 years, and it was going well. If it had gone poorly, Sparta could say, see, that's what happens when you invade Sparta. And people might be shy about doing it for another 100 years. But this, you're proving it can be done. That opens the door for more. Now, what do you do when you've pressed your advantage and it's gone well? It didn't go perfectly, but it keeps going. It's going well. Well, you keep pressing. Sparta was down, but not out. Maybe they could be, though. Now, Messene. Before we said Messenia, and we said the Sicilian town of Messana. This is Messene. Different, but the same. The same people. So taking a cue from the Arcadians, or perhaps because it's just a natural idea, Epaminondas said, yeah, you don't beat Sparta by destroying Sparta directly. Maybe that works, but better to just weaken them to the point where they can't do their things anymore. That was Hannibal's idea to defeat Rome. He's like, look, I can't take Rome. I can't defeat Rome, the city. I can't capture it. I can't besiege it. It's too big. But if I can make all the Roman allies desert Rome, then Rome stands alone, then we can beat them. That's kind of the idea here. Epaminondas is like, taking on Sparta directly, maybe not. But if we separate Messene, the thing I was saying in the intro, if we can take away their slave state, the whole thing collapses. Their entire system falls apart. Then you don't even have to have these pitched battles. Then you don't even have to have thousands of dead. Sparta will naturally reform itself because it doesn't have this authority. It can't do what it was doing anymore. So it's a high-minded approach, but it's also a smart strategic approach. Fewer casualties, but maybe even more certainty. So if Messenia can be separated from Sparta and stay that way, that changes everything. So, but he didn't just say, hey guys, I got this idea. He did it the presentation way. He sold it. He made it exciting. He said, y'all, I had a dream. I had a dream that you should build a new city on Mount Ithome, the place where Messenians have found refuge many times over the years from Spartan aggression. Make it a city. Fully develop it. You guys were able to hold out up on there. There's water. There's access to food. You can do it. It's a great spot for a city. And they were like, inspiring. So we don't exactly know how much Epaminondas contributed to Megalopolis. He certainly encouraged it. And it seems likely that this campaign helped fund it. But this project, absolutely his. His idea, he oversaw it. He apparently even helped design like the architecture of the city, like where certain buildings would be. Again, just imagine doing that. I'm a guy who loves playing city builder games, RPG style types, things like that, where you're running city, Civilization, or Sim City. This fascinates me, doing it in real life. So they're enthusiastic about the idea, but they needed even more help than the Arcadians did. The Arcadians were already somewhat independent. This is a slave state. They've been under the Spartan yoke for 350 years, with the Cryptea killing all their best people all the time, all the smartest and brightest and bravest. So they really needed the help. The expertise has been culled out of them by Spartan evil. And so they not only welcomed the effort, they welcomed the leadership, where Arcadia is like, we can do this ourselves. Messini's like, by all means, we need your help, y'all. Anything to get rid of Sparta. Now, a lot of this was done very religiously. There were invocations, there were omens and sacrifices, spirits of the past. The ancient Messenian fallen were invited to join and bolster the community, in whatever ways they believed that would happen. They built a double set of walls here too, big and thick, not but very similar to the ones at Mantinea or Megalopolis. These excellently made, new style, Theban architecture, Theban design. 85 days is all it took. 85 days. Remember how little time they had? Remember what I told you, that this campaign started too late? He's like, I'm gonna exceed my term of office. I'm gonna face capital charges when I get home. So be it. That was Epaminondas' his attitude. He's like, well, yeah, but not doing this would have been a bigger crime. So I'm gonna do it. So they built this city in 85 days, while Sparta's too weak to do anything about it, including the walls, including buildings and springs and managing all this other stuff. But the most exciting part, perhaps the most heartwarming part, is that Epaminondas sent out messengers to all over the Greek world, to Libya, to Italy, to Naupactus, to all the places that Messenians were known to be living in, and said, y'all, home, it's there. You can come back. We did it. We've got a city for you to come live in. It isn't just a place. It isn't just defended. It's a walled fortress. You can live here. You're safe. And you can push back against Sparta in the process. In fact, a Libyan guy named Coman, who was the leader of the Messenian colony in Libya, he did the same, play the crowd maneuver for good reasons, and said he had a dream. Of course, I'm assuming that he's making this up. Maybe he doesn't. He said his dream was, I dreamt that I slept with my mother. Wait, what? That's gross. He's like, no, I didn't sleep with her. I meant we shared a bed. We shared a home. The mother in this case is not my mother, not my literal mother. I mean our mother. I mean Mother Messenia. Sleeping in my mother's arms again. It was a call to home. The dream was to go home. This was just a great way to put it. The Libyan Messenians were like, yeah, let's go. And they did. They packed their bags. A lot of them were just ready to go. Back to our ancient soil, back to where we belong, back to our culture, back to our traditions. We could bring all this stuff back. And it started to go. It was working. Whether it continues to go well, that's something, you're going to have to stick with us and continue the story. But as of this moment, we got 3 cities, as I said, 3 free cities, built in defiance of and in defense of against Spartan power. All 3 have walls. All 3 are democracies. All 3 are close to Sparta. Hey, all 3 even start with an M. Mantinea, Megalopolis, and Messene. Athens joins the fray. Spartan ambassadors headed to Athens to try to win support. Might sound crazy, but what did I say before? Athens prefers the enemy they know, even though they're so ideologically opposed. This is very disappointing, y'all, but it's what happened. Sparta just basically sent their best diplomats. Somehow, I don't know how Spartan diplomats were so good at this, given their ability, because they're so laconic, they don't say much. Apparently, maybe their diplomats were different. I don't know. The diplomats don't live in Sparta, so maybe they live more like the people that they're living with. Either way, their goal was simple: just convince Athens that Thebes is worse. It's like, yeah, we've had our differences in the past. Don't try not to remember the time that Lysander took down your city walls while making your own flute players play accompanying music to that ignominy. Don't think about that too much. Think about the fact that Thebes is right next door to you, and they're trying to be the top dog. Can you really live with that? The Thebes, the ones that helped Persia back in the day? I mean, that's maybe not the best thing to say because Sparta's buddy-buddy with Persia right now. But the point is, they sold it somehow. They said, hey, look, Thebes, they're lesser than you. It's almost like we're so different than you, but Thebes is like you, but worse. Can you really tolerate them being better, above you, when you're culturally superior? How can you live with that? Isn't it a shame? Doesn't that get you? Doesn't that make you mad? And think about what happens if you get to conquer Thebes. What would you get if you destroyed Sparta? Like, really, what kind of loot would you really expect? We don't have big piles of gold in our houses. We don't have silver. We don't carry all this wealth. Thebes does. If you help us, one day we'll take Thebes. Look at all that loot they have. They got so much more loot than we do. You'll benefit more by being with us, right? How did this work? Maybe it was that last part, the loot of Thebes. But it worked. It did work. Athens, not only did they agree, they were like, yeah, we'll help you re-enslave Messenia. Sure, why not? Yeah, we'll do that. Democratic values for me, not thee. That's Athens, yeah. They gave honorary citizenship to Dionysius, tyrant of Syracuse, alongside. So they're like buddying up with tyrants and Sparta. Like, not good. All these allies, tyrants and autocrats. Yeah, it's not that strange if you follow modern politics to see democratic states ally with tyrants and autocrats. It's actually not uncommon at all. But it does sound weird, when you're presented it with this way. So Thebes just kind of shook their heads and went, what the hell? I mean, you know what else? Athens actually has statues of tyrant slayers. They celebrate tyrant slayers. Like, even in this era, they have yearly festivals where they put garlands on them. Like, yay, the tyrant slayers. Now let's talk about our allies, the tyrants. It's very strange. Anyway, not all of Athens was with it, though. Even though there was support for this idea, even though the Spartan Democrats had won people over, they didn't win over everybody. It may have been like you got us to agree, but when we sobered up in the morning, we realized what we agreed to. Like, what? How much wine did we have when we were talking to the Spartans last night? They sent Iphicrates to block the isthmus, to trap Epaminondas in the south, to starve out his army, to screw the Arcadians, and all these other things. Like, well, that's who would have to give them food. And we just got through saying how Arcadia is the least food producing of the 7 regions in the Peloponnese. So. But Iphicrates was like, yeah, I can block this. Like, it's the neck. It's kind of like the neck, right? It's a lot of territory that's just really narrow. You can't travel along it with a big army. It's narrow. But there's 2 passes through the isthmus, and he fortified one of them and ignored the other one entirely. The bigger one. He ignored the bigger one. So Xenophon, author, friend of Sparta, and general warrior, he says Iphicrates' career is full of genius. He does so many things so well, but he screwed up really badly. Come on, Xenophon. He clearly did this on purpose. He clearly just didn't want to fight, so he left the other pass open. He was like, oh, there's 2 passes? I forgot. Come on. This was clearly on purpose. He's like, yeah, we're not fighting Thebes. We voted to fight them, but I don't have to do that. So he leads his army and just sits them all over here and is like, y'all just go right on by. And that's what they did. The Theban army just passes right by like, hey, y'all. Didn't you guys vote to fight us? I'm glad you're not, but what happened here? Like, yeah, we don't want to fight you. That was just some diplomacy. Yeah. So you can see how maybe the people and the soldiers and the politicians weren't all on the same page about some of this stuff here. So when the Theban army returns home, the predictable thing happened. They broke the law very straightforwardly. The letter of the law absolutely violated, and the letter of the law says if you exceed your term of office as a boetarch, you must be executed. Pelopidas was on trial first. And in like a lot of modern trials where you get to find out who's accusing you. You can't just have faceless accusers here. He found out it was Meneclitus. You might remember that name. He was one of the people that was with Pelopidas and Melone and Pamenes and these others that were the commando group that freed Thebes from Spartan domination when they had sneak attacked the Cadmea. Meneclitus was part of this, but he was pissed. He didn't get the glory that a lot of his friends did, a lot of his compatriots did. And he was mad about it. This many years later, y'all, it's been 9 years since that. So he's still jealous about it. He's still pissed. And so he's using the court system to try to get his revenge. He brings it at Pelopidas, and people are just like, come on, Pelopidas? This is like one of our best guys. We're not going to execute him over this. And he wasn't even the main guy. He was the leader. He was sure he was in charge, sort of, but Epaminondas was the real leader here. That's not what Pelopidas said. Pelopidas wasn't trying to pass the buck, but other people said that. So he's like, Pelopidas didn't take this well. He was pretty upset about being put on trial for this. He's like, guys, this is obvious. And Pelopidas has a temper, though. This is his guy. He takes things more personally. Epaminondas, he was like, well, we got to go by the law here. You know, he bore it stoically, but he once again had the coup de grace. He once again had the right strategy. He's like, yeah, okay, yeah, death penalty. But here's my request, you guys. On my tombstone, I want you to make sure you had me executed for being the first guy to beat Sparta. Make sure everyone sees that. I want everyone to read it. Read it out loud. Make sure it's broadcast everywhere. I doubt he used the word broadcast, but he's like, tell everyone, and they're like, apparently the jury just broke out laughing. They're like, yeah, we're not going to kill you, man. Like, this guy didn't even take treasure for himself. Like, he didn't even bring a dime home for his own household. Like, come on, we're not killing him. Shut up, Meneclitus. But he had the law on his side, so they couldn't ignore him. But like when it came down to it, it was the whole spirit of the law, letter of the law thing. The spirit of the law won out easily. But let's not pretend this was nothing, though, because this is going to continue to be a pattern. This isn't done. Meneclitus isn't finished. He lost the battle, not the war. So the elections come around again. And of course, the elections must have been really soon because those guys exceeded their term of office by like 4 months. It wasn't a small amount. That's a whole third of the year it is a lot. Yes, I agree with them doing it. But this time it was going to be different. So they were both voted boetarch again, but the strategy was different. They're like, you guys are both great commanders. We shouldn't send you together. Let's separate you two, though we can accomplish 2 campaigns at once. And there was a need for that, too. There was still plenty to do in the south. That was by no means settled. You never know what Sparta might try to pull. None of those cities were completely finished yet. Yes, they had done a lot, but there was more to do. The situation was still, up in the air. But not every problem is in the Peloponnese. Pelopidas and the 2 Alexanders. Remember that Jason of Pherae had been murdered, then his brother was killed, then his other brother was killed by that first... Yeah, the 2 brothers killed each other, then the son of one of those brothers killed... Anyway, Jason's nephew Alexander is now in charge. He had lost his exchange, if you recall, with Alexander II. A real brief recap, Alexander II of Macedon was asked to come to Larissa, which is the biggest city in Thessaly, to help drive away Alexander II, or drive away Alexander Pherae. Very confusing with 2 Alexanders. But then Alexander II, after helping, he's like, you know what, I'm just going to leave my men here and leave garrisons in Larissa and exert my authority on y'all. So they traded one Alexander for another. Now, this was an improvement because the first Alexander Pherae, is a cruel, torturing madman who's not stupid. So very dangerous guy. But they were worried. I mean, Alexander Pherae wasn't dead. They got rid of him, but he's still out there. He's still powerful. He still has Jason's mercenary army. And he needs to be active because Jason's former mercenary army, that's now Alexander's mercenary army, has to be paid. They're expensive. So he's constantly going around doing things to get them paid. Jason was clever about getting them paid. And they like Jason because he was one of them. This guy's not one of them. And even though he has a similar level of cleverness, he's not as talented. He doesn't have the charisma. He doesn't have the charm to winkle people out of their money. He doesn't have the trickiness to get people to trust him. So he's just using terror and cruelty and intimidation and all sorts of things to get the money he needs to keep his engine running, his mercenary army engine running. And he was definitely less restrained than Jason. He was completely willing to be cruel. He didn't really care what people thought about him so much. He had married Jason's daughter, Thebe, forcefully, most likely. And that's, of course, rather incestuous. This is just his uncle's daughter. So it's a first cousin. He also raped one of her brothers, his own cousin, one of Jason's sons. She had 3 brothers. So yikes. He didn't kill them, which you might expect in a situation like this, to kill the sons of Jason. But partly his grip on power wasn't as established as it could be. That would be he could be seen as cursed for doing something like that. You know, as we said, Greeks had these peculiar ideas about murder. So even though it seems like kind of an obvious idea, like in a Game of Thrones setting, medieval setting, those people would absolutely be killed. This is a different time and place. It's not quite how things work. So people knew this guy. He was a known guy. It's understandable that they would be worried about his return. So they turned to Thebes. Thebes is next door. Thebes is powerful, and their reputations of their leaders are very good. Pelopidas, Epaminondas, these guys you can trust them. We tried to trust Alexander II, didn't work. So let's try Thebes. They're not going to play dirty, probably, like he did. So Pelopidas is dispatched with an army and with his great reputation for fairness. And as a guy not to mess with on the battlefield. So you want to negotiate with him, and he's good at negotiating. And you don't want to have those negotiations fail, because if they do, then you got to face them on the battlefield, and that's a bad idea. Remember, this guy is like if Brandon Stark, Ned's older brother, had actually inherited and had a successful career of men following him and doing great things with those men who followed him. Like what Brandon was poised to be, Pelopidas actually became. And he has this right down to the temper, right? And that's where he's less good in this role as a diplomat. Guys with tempers are not always well suited to be diplomats. So Pelopidas showed up with his army and drove out the Macedonian garrison. Apparently it wasn't much of a problem at all. They may have just sued for peace and be like, oh, we don't want to fight that. Just please let us go. We'll just leave. I suspect it was more like that. He was able to bring both Alexander to the negotiating table. Not at the same time, though, separately. First, Alexander Pherae just showed up. He's like, I'm sorry. I didn't realize this would get me into so much trouble. You're really strong. I want to be on your good side. He might have been a little afraid of Pelopidas. He might have been afraid of Pelopidas turning his countrymen against him. Either way, he seemed concerned. But it might have been an act, or both. It could have been both. Pelopidas talked down to him a little bit. He's like, if you behave, we will recognize your status as Tagus over Thessaly. Remember, that's like their title, their ruler title. And that was a big offer, because Thebes is so powerful right now, and his officially being recognized as ruler is a big deal. That's huge for his claim to power. But Alexander's like, no, I expect recognition now. What is this after business? What do you mean behave and then you'll do that? Give it to me now and I'll prove I can do that. And Pelopidas lost his temper. He's like, you did this, you did that, you did this. How can we trust you? That wasn't the most diplomatic thing to say, even if it was true. Alexander was insulted. His pride was touched. So he got up and left in a huff, walked away with his head held high, upset. So Pelopidas is like, well, damn, that didn't work. So he goes to turn his attention to the other king, Alexander II of Macedon, who was having trouble with another guy. Remember, King Alexander II had already had trouble with this Pausanias the Pretender guy, and he's got Illyrians attacking him. So Pelopidas comes in and says, hey, I'm supporting your brother-in-law, Ptolemy, who had once schemed with your own mother to murder your father. This is such a mess, right? So King Alexander's like, all right, fine. I don't want to mess with Thebes either. We were friends before. Amyntas, you guys we were friends with Athens before. So why don't we come over to you? We'll be friends with, we'll switch our alliance from Athens to Thebes. Pelopidas is like, yes, you're going to do that. That's a great idea. But you're also going to send hostages because we can't really trust you. This is probably what he asked for from Alexander of Pherae, who refused to give up hostages. I don't know which hostages would have worked on Alexander of Pherae. He doesn't have children of his own, so that may not have been a good strategy anyway, but it worked here. Alexander II was too young to have his own children, but he had two younger brothers. One of them named Perdiccas, who I believe was sent somewhere to be a hostage. I don't know where. Doesn't matter. He'll reappear later. His hostage situation was not notable beyond this. The other younger brother, the youngest brother, is named Philip. He was sent to Thebes, where he lived at the house of Epaminondas, probably became his lover, because they did a lot of that, and definitely saw the Theban military from the inside. He interacted and got lessons from Epaminondas, probably Pelopidas too, definitely other high members of the sacred band. He learned a lot. Now, if you think teaching a Macedonian royal the inner workings of the Theban military, if you think that's going to backfire, you are on top of things. Yes, this is, spoiler alert, the most important Philip of the ancient world. This guy right here. You may already know which Philip I'm talking about. Some of you probably do. But you might not have known that he was a hostage in the house of Epaminondas during the era of Theban supremacy and the rise of the sacred band. So that is a really cool dot to connect. For the rest of you, well, this is just getting more and more interesting as we go. Now, with this, Pausanias the Pretender was like, all right, well, I can't take on all that. Looks like Thebes is an ally with Alexander II. I definitely can't win. So he just backed off on his pretending and went to live with Cotys I, king of Thrace, in relative peace. But he will also be back. Speaking of back, it was time to go back to Laconia. The Arcadians were like, hey, come back. We need more work. Campaign season's back. There's more to do. Epaminondas is like, yeah, let's go. Pelopidas had gone north to deal with the Alexanders. Epaminondas goes back to continue to deal with Sparta and help their allies. By this time, though, the situation had already changed a lot. It had only been a few months, but Sparta had already recovered quite a bit. Not of territory, but of power, of manpower. They got help from elsewhere. People were sending them things. And not only that, Athens was on their side now. They got mercenaries from here. They got support from there. Epaminondas' army was nowhere near 70,000 this time either. It would have been maybe 15,000, so a very strong 15,000, but not capable of doing nearly as much. Yet I think expectations were still really high, and that's going to be a problem. Epaminondas versus Chabrias, two of the best commanders of this era. We haven't heard much from Chabrias lately, but he was deployed to Corinth by Athens to block Theban entry. Remember, Iphicrates didn't really try to keep Epaminondas from leaving the Peloponnese. This time, Chabrias is going to actually try to stop Epaminondas from entering the Peloponnese. It's definitely a showdown we didn't actually see coming. You know, we might have thought Epaminondas versus Agesilaus was coming, or one of these other ones, but these are two of the big names. Now, Chabrias always moves quickly, always fast. He got there right away as soon as the command was given to him, and immediately starts digging ditches, defenses, palisades, all the stuff that would make the isthmus even more difficult to get through. And it was quite a thing for Epaminondas to discover when he got there with his army. He's like, oh, well, this is not at all like last time. How are we going to get through that? So, you know, he's patient. He's open-minded, sends out scouts, starts to look around. Where's the weakest part of this defensive line? Surely there's a weak spot here somewhere. And he found one. It wasn't weak, but it was what he thought was the weakest. And they did a thing they did before, which was wait for the early morning when the Spartan guards are changing, when they're doing a shift change, attacked during the shift change. It worked. He punched through the defensive cordon and got inside and basically had free reign to walk into the isthmus, except that the Spartan line they broke through, the Spartans retreated on top of a hill, a significant sized army. So this presents Epaminondas with a problem. He could pretty easily sit there and besiege that army and keep them and destroy them, perhaps. But that wouldn't be a worthy success for this campaign, just destroying a small Spartan army, or actually Athenian army, and not doing any damage to actual Sparta. It would take a while. This is slow, right? They don't have time for this. The problem is if they just advance forward, then this army can just descend from the hill and start attacking them from behind. Not good. What Epaminondas did was he arranged a truce with the commander of the enemy forces. It was like, hey, look, we'll swear oaths and you guys can depart. We can depart. Neither attacks the other for a certain amount of days. This was agreed to. And later on, neither Sparta nor Thebes is going to be happy about it. They're both going to come down on the commanders for doing it. So Epaminondas does the same thing basically as last time, starts ravaging the countryside, attacking places they hadn't attacked before, taking loot, taking food. Then they get to, they go through a while. They're able to accomplish a few things, but it's not terribly successful as a campaign. They're able to, no one stops them, no one impedes them for the most part, but there's just not as much to do. They're not like they're ravaging territory. There's only so much of that you can do before it's just diminishing returns, right? But it was still demonstrating that they were superior. Sparta couldn't come face them in the field. Every day that happens, it's demoralizing to Sparta. Every day it sends the message that there's a new dawn, that there's a new chief in town, a new sheriff in town, and it's Thebes. It's not Sparta. But then they return. It's time to come back from the campaign. As I said, there isn't as much to describe. They shored up the things they had already done. They went to Messenia and continued to make sure things were going well there. They stopped in at Mantinea and Megalopolis. There's a lot of upkeep, less of new efforts and more of just making sure the previous efforts were continuing in good order. So it's not as exciting. It's not as monumental. And that's in itself going to be a problem for Epaminondas when he returns and accounts for his accomplishments or lack thereof. But before he gets back, another bad thing happens. When he's on his way back, leading the army, Chabrias is there again, trying to block their way. There's another pitched battle. This time, the Thebans do pretty well with the sacred band out in front, and there's an opportunity, or so the sacred band sees or thinks they see, to rush the gates of Corinth. This battle is happening outside Corinth, like near it, inside of it. And they believe they have an opportunity to get inside Corinth and hold the gates open for the whole army to get inside, which would have been, whoa, that would have been a huge thing. But it didn't go well. Corinth locked down. Chabrias reinforced. He exhorted the defenders to do their best. They took defensive positions. They started hurling missiles down. There was a new invention in play. There was a larger bolt thrower invented over in Sicily. They had already invented a crossbow-like weapon, and now they were deploying these larger ones that were kind of like a more modern ballista or medieval era ballista, and they were a problem. So they fought the sacred band with the help of this sort of missile attacks from above, from their walls, and it didn't go well for the sacred band. The sacred band took some casualties. They had to run away. Corinth charged at them and killed a few more of them as they're running back. Then they grabbed the bodies and brought them back to Corinth so that Epaminondas would have to come ask for them. They didn't intend to desecrate them or anything, but they wanted to force him into the unproud moment of having to ask for their dead. And once he did, they gave the bodies there. They erected a trophy. The first time Epaminondas was beaten. The first time someone could erect a trophy and say, we beat the sacred band. And it was Chabrias. Chabrias, yeah, I'm the Jamie Lannister of Greece, and I just, boom, my reputation's even better now. I beat the unbeatable. I beat a bigger army. I gave them casualties. Still, Epaminondas had the field. They had Corinth, the Corinthians, and with Athenian help, but they couldn't exactly just go out and do whatever they wanted. Epaminondas is still sitting there with his big army, like, yeah, you beat us, but we aren't beaten. But it was still about time to go home. They had some more time. They were going to try to accomplish more. They still had some designs on Corinth or maybe some of the smaller cities nearby. But this is when one of the units sent by Dionysius, a mercenary unit that he lent to Sparta, because, tyrants support other tyrants, he had sent Celts and Iberians, which are, they live way the hell over in, Spain and stuff. That's nowhere near where any of this is. And they're very much a style of warfare that the Greeks did not know how to deal with. They were actually like Dothraki horse archers, but instead of bows, they used javelins. So they would ride up and throw javelins and ride away. You couldn't get them back. You couldn't stop them. They wreaked havoc on Epaminondas' army, and he recognized that he did not have an answer for this. So he just said, hey, let's pack it up, go home. Let's go back to Thebes, regroup before we take too many casualties. This was an okay campaign, maybe a B-, whereas the other one was like an A or an A+. Still a win, but definitely not as a resounding success. And because it was, I described it that way, but I think a lot of the Thebans were more disappointed. They were expecting more. Things were going so well. This was just kind of an okay result, Perhaps expectations should have been lower, but it wasn't glorious. Plus, there were dead sacred band members. So Menocleides, political jealous hater guy, was there, ready to go, citing the casualties, citing the lack of progress against Sparta, citing that peace deal where he let those Spartans go off the hill, citing losing to Cabrius, just anything he could think of. All the rabble rousing, all the negativity, look at this guy, thinks he's better than us. And nothing works like that. This guy thinks he's better than us, right? And Epaminondas, he is a high-minded guy. He is quite an example. It wouldn't take a whole lot to twist that into, he thinks he's superior. With his, I don't have any money, I do this, I do that. Who does he think? Who is he fooling? You can almost hear it. You just got to pretend it's said in Greek. So he won the trial again. He was acquitted. This one wasn't a capital trial because he didn't exceed his oath, his length of office. So it was also a different trial, but he was still brought on charges of bad leadership or exactly what, I don't know, or maybe multiple charges. He was still acquitted, but he wasn't acquitted with the jury laughing at the other side. It was closer this time. So Epaminondas' leadership, not as secure as it had been. Definitely not. In fact, the elections were held again shortly after, and the damage had been done. Epaminondas was not reelected. He's just a private citizen, which makes him more vulnerable to political attacks. Now, in the meantime, the failure of, I don't think it was a failure. The relative failure or lack of success of Arcadia, or in Arcadia, was something for Lycomedes, the patriot of Mantinea, to use. He kept pushing this idea of independence. He's like, look, if we just keep relying on Thebes, they're gonna be the Sparta to us. They're gonna dominate us. Like, we are always hiring ourselves out. How many different armies out there? Our Arcadian mercenaries are the backbone of them. We were the backbone of many Spartan armies. We are the backbone of this army. We were the backbone at Troy. There's all these different things they can point to. It's like Arcadians. And with Epaminondas' relative lack of success, he was able to push this argument even farther. That let's just do this on our own. And a lot of people started to agree with him. The question is, and this is a question for next time, is he right? Are they better off? Are they? I don't know. All right, a little bit more, and that'll be it for today. We have the 368 Olympics. That is, we're not going to get through all the way through 368, but we're going to get it started here. So we have an Olympiad. We haven't had one in a while. The last was 372. The two-horse race was won by Euryleonis of Sparta, the Pancration by Xenarches of Stratos, the boxing of Aristion of Epidaurus, the naked men's race by Pythostratus of Athens, and the boys' naked race was won by a 12-year-old named Demiscos of Messene. Of Messene! A Messenian Olympic competitor! Those would not have existed The Spartans wouldn't have allowed the Messenians to compete in something so important, so glorious, so noble, so meaningful, something that gets you lots of attention. That's not what Fight Club is about. You don't let the servants in Fight Club get all the attention for their achievements in athletics. So this was like some kind of kid that 5 years before he wouldn't have been allowed to compete. And he was the minimum age possible. He was 12. It's like 12 to 17 or something for this race. So he was the youngest possible, and he still won. Like, this is the one that I said gives me the feels. Like, this is a culture that was under Spartan enslavement for 350 years. What a win that is. Like, this kid, he's proving his country. Like, imagine like a tiny country winning gold in the Olympics against Russia and China and the United States. It's similar to that because Sparta was killing all their most athletic people. It was killing the ones who were the bravest and the most outstanding. So somehow this kid survived that and showed his country what they could be again, reminded them of who they were. What a rallying cry. This kid was probably super famous, a big hero. I wish we knew more about him. They did have one other Olympic champion in like the 460s. That's because it came during that 17-year period where they managed to hold Sparta off. Then they started sending people to the Olympics again. But then Sparta comes back in, reconquers them, and you don't hear from Messenia in the Olympics anymore. Now, Persia is busy with their Great Satraps Revolt. So we're not going to have much to say about that this time because it's playing out so slowly compared to Greece because the space in between these places is so much larger. It isn't 2 days walk from one to the other. It's like 1,000 miles or hundreds of miles. So we have a guy named Philiscus. Philiscus is sent by Ariobarzanes, and Ariobarzanes wants to establish a new king's peace, a common peace, whatever you want to call it, the one that was enforced by Persia. They had some success with that by before, and Athens tried this one again. It didn't work either, so they try again. Again, they try to have Sparta in charge, but Sparta just doesn't have the pull anymore. Again, Persia's got the same thing in mind. They want peace in Greece so they can hire Greek soldiers to go fight in their wars, which is really important right now because they're in the midst of the Great Satraps Revolt, which, by the way, has not gotten nearly to the pitch it's going to get. Right now, it's just Datames and Nectanebo, the rebel pharaoh. It's just those two, but it's going to be more. So this also, by the way, shows that Persia is still in Sparta's corner, though their support is waning/wavering. And no one has a real dominant peace here. Athens' peace, again, wasn't signed by Sparta or Thebes, and these peace talks didn't go very far either. So Philiscus gives another 2,000 mercenaries he brought with him to Sparta. So Sparta gets another little boost of manpower that they need from the outside because they lost so many of their own. I'm going to keep going for a little bit more. Just checking in with Persia real quick. Because we aren't going to talk about them too much today. Let's remind ourselves that Prince Ariaspes is now the heir after the palace coup that was failed under Darius. And interestingly, Princess Atassa, who was married almost to Tiribazus, instead married her own father, starts an affair with her brother, but not the brother who is heir, the other brother. And this brother, Acus, really wants to be the great king, and he's not going to settle for his position. So look forward to that. Meanwhile, we still have the building of the Great Satraps Revolt, which is going to be something we talk about next time. In fact, these Greek mercenaries, some of them are going to go fight for some of these rebels instead of Artaxerxes. But our last topic for today, it's going to leave us in a very exciting spot for next time, is the return of the Alexanders. As Epaminondas went south again into Peloponnese, well, actually, it was the return of Pelopidas. They don't come to Thebes. He goes back up north. Thessaly and Macedonia again flared up. Both the Alexanders were doing stuff, and Pelopidas went back. Alexander of Pherae continued to be horrible to his people. He forced people to dress up like animals and hunted them. This is very Ramsay Boltonish. He was a weird guy that felt bad for other people, but not people that he tortured. There was a play called Trojan Women by Euripides And this was a popular play back then. It still is performed these days. And it's called Trojan Women because it's about the plight of captives. Trojan women were captives. They went through all sorts of awful things under the Greeks who captured them in the Trojan War. The play was so good that he felt bad for these Trojan women, and it made him feel ashamed of the fact that he felt bad for these women, but not for the women and men that he had tortured and done all these awful things to. So the people of around Thessaly and some people in Macedonia both were like, hey, Thebes, we need Pelopidas back. Bring him back. We need more help. His work has been undone here. We don't blame him for that, but we need him again. So Pelopidas tries to rush up there. He's like, I don't have a lot of time. So he gets the mercenaries together as quickly as he can. He brings Ismenias with him. This guy, Ismenias, who was the grandson of the first anti-Spartan diplomat that was killed right before the Cadmea expedition, or right after the Cadmea incident. So still in politics. And this Ismenias guy, he's the ice to Pelopidas' fire. He's a real good pairing. Because Pelopidas is, as we saw, he loses his temper. Maybe that's why Ismenias came this time, to sort of balance him out. More about him later. They also figured they'd get support from Thessaly. Thessaly asked them to come, so they figured people would show up and join him. Meanwhile, while this is happening, Alexander II goes to a ceremony, a war dance. It's a cool kind of religious war martial performance thing. And while he's there, agents of Ptolemy of Eloros kill him. Ptolemy of Eloros, again, has a relationship with Alexander's mother. So he just killed his lover's son. Yeah. And that wasn't cool. I don't know how they arranged. I don't know how they agreed to this. I don't know what she thought about this. She's going to end up marrying him. Probably out of self-preservation, but maybe she didn't like her own son. I don't know, but it's some serious royal messiness. Anyway, Ptolemy of Alaros couldn't inherit. He thought maybe he could. He had a claim. He's got royal blood, but with Pelopidas on the scene, the regular succession is going to be followed, which means it passes to the next brother, which is Perdiccas. But Perdiccas is underage. And I think that was Ptolemy's angle. He's like, well, they can't make this guy king. He's too young. They're going to have to pick me anyway. So Pelopidas is like, yeah, I guess this guy's got some leverage. Then Ptolemy gets even more leverage. He shows up with some extra money and bribes Pelopidas' mercenaries. He didn't do anything violent. He didn't turn them on him. He just used this as additional leverage because he didn't want to fight Thebes. That's crazy. But he wanted their support, and he was going to really do some underhanded stuff to get them on his side. So Pelopidas was backed into a corner and said, okay, you can be regent. You can be regent for Perdiccas. You rule in his stead until he's old enough. He's like, yeah, I'll rule until he's old enough. I'll kill him. He's like, I heard you say that. You're sending hostages to make sure that nothing untoward happens, including your own son. You send me your son, and you've got noble families behind you. I see them. They're sending their sons too. Pelopidas wasn't playing. So they're like, all right, that's fine. And he said, look, and I've got Philip too. I've got your other brother, right? The one who's going to turn into a big danger for all of us. I've got him. He didn't say that part, but the threat was there. So Ptolemy is maybe restrained here. He's like, all right, I can't just easily murder Perdiccas and take over after all. I guess Pelopidas kind of put me in a cage here, but maybe I could figure a way out of this. So we'll come back to him. Pelopidas, again, doesn't let things go. He says, those mercenaries, those guys that Ptolemy bribed away from me, I'm not done with them. I want to punish those guys. So he and Ismenias go around. They gather some Thessalians who will be loyal to them, kind of what they planned on in the first place, gather enough of them. Then they do some subterfuge, some intrigue. They find out where these mercenaries live, where they keep their stuff, where they keep their wealth and their wives. So then Pelopidas and his men scheme to capture that. They capture the wives and wealth of these mercenaries who turned on them and said, all right, you got to pay us to get this back. There was no violence done other than maybe a little pushing and shoving, but he got revenge on those mercenaries and got some money back from them. So then he goes to a place called Pharsalus, an important town nearby, to do some other business related to the Macedonians. But Alexander of Pherae shows up looking kind of ragged, even though he's got his army. And I think this may have been a little bit of a ploy. He shows up and he's like, he and his Menenius, Pelopidas, are like, oh, there's this guy again. Is he here to apologize again? What's going on? Let's have a talk. So they do the peace flag, get ready for a parley. But Alexander II was thinking ahead here. That's putting it mildly. He didn't start parlaying. He said, seize them. And grabbed Pelopidas and his Menenius. And before the Thessalian troops could do anything about it, or perhaps he threatened to kill Pelopidas and his Menenius if they tried anything, he took them back to Pherae. Uh-oh. Pelopidas and his Menenius imprisoned by the cruelest, torturing, spear-worshipping guy of the area. What's he going to do here? What's he going to do with a Theban hero, a living legend, a guy that many people are intimidated of even when he doesn't have an army, and they do? Are they going to ransom him? Are they going to use him as leverage? Are they going to do something horrible? Are they going to do all of the above? But just like that, the two best Theban leaders, the ones most chiefly responsible for transforming the state into what it is now, including the defeat of Sparta, after first freeing it from Sparta, they're out of action. Pelopidas is in jail, enemy prison. Epaminondas not elected. He's just a soldier now. And of course, that's what he does, because he's Epaminondas. He's like, yeah, I'm a soldier now. I'm just in the infantry. So Pelopidas is imprisoned by one of the worst people in our story. And Epaminondas, what's he going to do about it? He's an unelected infantryman. Yeah. So that's where we leave things. Oh boy. Yep. Leaving it on a cliffhanger here. Pelopidas is going to have really interesting things happen while in prison, which may or may not end well. But during, we're going to be reminded of Catelyn's conversations with Jaime in chains. There's going to be some really fascinating conversations between prisoner and wife of the tyrant. Alexander of Pherae's evils are going to escalate, and he's going to find surprising allies in the wake of his capture of Pelopidas. Epaminondas is going to pull a Tyrian. Arcadia and the Mantinean, I can't say this word. Arcadia and the Mantinean League under Lycomedes are going to try to go it on their own, while Sparta resets and regroups and comes back strong with all this surprising help they're getting from people. Like, why are so many people turned on Sparta, yet so many tyrants are like, hey, we're all about helping Sparta. Get back on your feet, Sparta. Thebes is going to try to campaign without their two best leaders. That may not go so well, but maybe it will. We'll see. Maybe it's a chance for new leaders to make their mark. And finally, the Great Satraps Revolt is going to escalate and spill into Greece. Persia's kind of been separate from the story. I had talked before about how they were all coming together, and then it started to split apart again, but it's going to come all back together again in ways that I don't think you could have possibly predicted. I certainly couldn't have. Here's our trivia question that we asked at the beginning. There's different names for generals in Greece, partly because they have different rights, different powers. There's sometimes different sub-languages in play. For example, Athenian and Arcadian generals are called strategos. What are Theban generals called? Boeotarch. The answer is Boeotarch. They almost, I think in episode 2, I think it was, they call everything something a tarch. You know, it's just the head of something. You're the arc of this. The Boeotarch or the Paliarch or the Taxotarch, or yeah, there's all sorts of arcs. And they're in charge of things. So, yep, that's that. There were 7 Boeotarchs elected yearly, and of course, very important. And here we go with the cat of black and white. Jakin wants to say hi. He doesn't really want to say hi, but he's saying hi anyway. Say hi to Jakin, y'all. We mentioned our previous episodes in this series quite a few times. They all go together. They work fairly well as standalones, but really this series should be listened to from the beginning. Of course, I mentioned some of our other historical Game of Thrones episodes, like Ragnarok versus The Long Night, the episode we're nominated for a Hugo for, the Black Dinner episode, the Scottish episode of history that inspired the Red Wedding. We have an episode on the Wars of the Roses, and a follow-up called Pretenders and Imposters that probably has the most Game of Thrones direct content of any of these. So they all have some, but that one includes Pretenders and Imposters in Westeros, as well as some real-world examples that inspired those. Thanks to you all for hanging out today. Appreciate the live support. And for those of you who check it out later, what's that? Wiggly, wiggly, wiggly. I got a direction from the producer there. Got to get that camera to focus. So thanks again, everybody, for hanging out. We appreciate your support. I know this is niche content. I really love doing it. It's a challenge for me. I have to do a lot more research and work on this, but it's fun. And you can tell that my enthusiasm level maintains all the way through. I can't wait to explain what comes next. There's a lot more. I always finish with more notes than I can fit into a single episode. That just means more fun for next time. Thanks to Joey Townsend for our intro music. Thanks to Michael Klarfeld for our video intro, our outro, our cool stuff, and the maps behind us. Michael Klarfeld is a legend. On behalf of Ashea, I'm Aziz. We'll see you next time. You know what to do until then. Valar Reedus.